Maverick News, the antivirus program for your mind. And now, the Freedom Reporters.
Good evening, Maverick family. I'm Rick Walker. This is the Maverick News Channel, and we are the Freedom Reporters.
And hello, I'm your co-host, Brennan Kennedy. We are here today with a very special broadcast with a very special guest. And we'll be having lots of updates and conversations with things starting to kick off here in the Ontario election. So there's going to be lots to see.
Jim Karahalios, the leader of the Ontario New Blue Party, will be joining us fairly soon. He's not here right at the moment, but he's on his way, and he has messaged. He has confirmed he is joining us tonight live on the broadcast, and it's fortunate that we have him coming on tonight because, as you may know, Bill 100 was passed in the dark of night, secretly, almost secretly. Certainly snuck. They sneaked it. Sneak or snuck. They did it in an underhanded kind of way. The Ford government passed this legislation that is, to say the least, draconian. It they have no regard for the Constitution, no regard for the Charter, no regard for our freedoms. It strips away more and more of our freedoms. This is a new law that aims directly at the truckers and blockades and protests of that nature, and protests in general. And yes, it can be applied in a broad and sweeping way, even though it's the catalyst for it was the Ottawa protest, and that's obviously what they're targeting. It's written with such broad language that they can use it to target virtually anyone for any kind of protest at any time. And it gives police broad sweeping powers to make arrests, lay charges, and convict people on site with no due process. You're guilty until proven innocent. They can haul you off to jail, fine you, confiscate your property, including your vehicle. They can confiscate your driver's license. It's unbelievably powerful, and I would say unconstitutional. So the New Blue Party has been standing against this, and Jim Karahalios, I'm sure, will have a lot to say about that tonight, along with some other issues, including Bill 67, critical race theory, which I know they scored a sort of a victory, I think, with the PCs this past week. But we'll get into all of that as the broadcast carries on. And in fact, Jim is joining us right now. Shall we go to Jim and jump right into it? Why not? Let's do that.
Let's do that.
Jim Karahalios, welcome to the broadcast. Welcome to the Maverick News Channel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, from one Maverick to another, it's good to be here, guys. So thanks for having me, Rick and Brendan. Barely made it getting back from Toronto.
Well,
sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. I apologize.
Not a problem at all. No,
absolutely not.
It's a privilege just to have you here tonight.
Yes, very much so a privilege. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really excited to hear a lot of your input. I did a lot of research on you today, and my hat goes off to you, sir. You are a true Canadian.
Well, thanks. I don't know if no one anticipates going through all that when they say, maybe I'll get involved in politics after work. But you get into it and the issues are really important. And it became a family affair for us. And, every time you've got that fork in the road and the other side tells you, get out, you have to make a choice. You just leave and you say, forget it. On the other hand, we have conviction. We have thousands of people across Ontario and Canada telling us to keep going. And we've chosen to keep going.
So let's just back up a little bit in case some people aren't familiar with your background and the history of the New Blue and where you came from. You have history with the Conservative Party federally and provincially, right? Can you tell us how you first got involved with the politics?
So I got involved in politics actually very, very local at the student level in undergrad and university. And, growing up, I grew up with values that I think most Ontarians would agree with. My parents, I was born in Ontario. My parents weren't. But like so many millions of others, they picked Ontario because Ontario and Canada was a place where there was a set of shared values, and that welcomed people like my parents. And I wasn't really following politics. I was concentrating on school and sports growing up and got involved in undergrad. And then by the time I went to law school, I decided I was in law school in Ottawa and decided, I'm going to get involved and volunteer in partisan politics. And it was around the time of the 2005 election. It was right before that. And when you go to law school, you realize, wow, if you have any kind of common sense, you're a conservative. So it became very clear to me after studying numbers and math and engineering, going to law school and studying legal issues, that I was a conservative. And I volunteered for the Conservative Party of Canada. And it was always a way of getting involved, giving back, standing up for the process and the democratic process. First, I got involved federally. And then provincially, I was on the federal National Policy Committee for 2 cycles, 4 or 5 years, elected by presidents, and really working hard in getting a grassroots policy process for the federal Conservative Party, because, the powers that be never want to have a grassroots policy process. And things kind of fast forward, things went forward very quickly, I would say. In 2016-17, after Patrick Brown became leader of the PC party, and he flip-flopped on basically every core issue. But the one issue that, not many people, or there wasn't a committed voice against calling him out on, it was the carbon tax. And I led a campaign called Axe the Carbon Tax. And then very quickly after that, there was all this voter fraud going on inside the Ontario PC party. That's how they were picking some of their candidates. And they were really targeting candidates that were standing up or had a political opinion that was conservative. And it wasn't in line with Patrick Brown and the Ontario PC party brass saying, we're going to be a left-wing progressive party, top-down party. And it was really nefarious, Rick and Brendan, because instead of just telling people you can't run, they would let people run. And then they would find out, oh, no, this person's going to win the nomination. And then vote rigging would happen. Like in Hamilton, the Hamilton police looked into it and verified it in 2018 that there was voter fraud going on. And so then I became the face of something called Take Back Our PC Party. And we were gathering thousands of signatures across Ontario to call a general meeting of this party. And at the time, wow, in hindsight, Rick, it's quite interesting. I was encouraging people to reform the Ontario PC party from the inside. Let's not recreate the wheel. We got a problem with the leader. Let's push back democratically. They got a constitution. I'm saying it, and it's, I can't believe it actually in hindsight, because what these guys did, instead of letting the democratic process unfold and calling a general meeting of the party to vote on the carbon tax, to redo a bunch of nominations, they said, what we'll do? We'll sue this guy and bankrupt him. And they did the premise of the lawsuit on this idea that I'm not allowed to mail people that they decide, are on some kind of a PC list. For example, if you're a donor, that's public information. I'm not allowed to mail those people, right? And that's the premise of how they spun it inside the party, whisper campaigns and through the press. The reality is, in court, I was very fortunate. In 6 weeks, we fought really hard, ran up a legal bill that was extraordinary, but fought really hard. And in 6 weeks, the judge kicked it out. It was 3 days before Christmas in 2017. The judge said to the PC party, you guys have no legal merit to your argument. And you got no facts to back up what you're saying. You're not one piece of evidence. to back up what you're saying. So in hindsight, it was very clear they were just trying to bankrupt me, right? Because if you guys know, you get in a lawsuit, someone sues you, can't get out. There's no exit. It's basically fork over the money that the other person's asking for, pay off their lawyer, and maybe if they let you out, you're out. And I had no out, and it was I had to dig in and fight, and we won. And that was kind of, I guess, the first time I became what you would say a public figure. People within the Conservative Party of Canada or the PC Party knew about my work organizing grassroots policy meetings and helping out, volunteering in different campaigns in North York, Mississauga, Cambridge, where we live. But you know, they kind of pushed it to the max. And then I thought, and my wife thought, okay, we've turned the corner. It was just Patrick Brown, a couple people. We didn't know it was a whole party problem, that the party brass really had no problem with the direction that Patrick Brown was taking the Ontario PC Party in. The problem was that there was all this pushback from the members. And instead of fixing what was going on, instead of saying, you know, he was wrong on the carbon tax, he was wrong on other issues, voter fraud, you know, let's change it. They decided to pin this CTV news story on him, these allegations, and force him out of caucus like that. And I remember watching it at the time and saying that it's a month after I won the lawsuit. I know the leader's on shaky ground because now the grassroots know this guy just tried to destroy a party member and an activist. But instead of just saying, you know, Patrick, caucus saying, Patrick, you know, your time's up, buddy. Like, you're on the wrong side of the carbon tax. There's voter fraud. There's other allegations going on about bags of money going missing at party headquarters. They concoct this Me Too story. I don't know. Half of it's right. Half of it's wrong. I don't know. I don't get into people's personal lives. I don't care.
No.
Okay. I don't care.
For the record, so everybody knows, Patrick Brown was a former running mate for the Ontario Conservative Party, and the allegations of some sort of sexual misconduct did go out against him. We're not going to go into that. I believe there is currently no legalities associated with that. He's in the clear. But yeah, we're not here to really commentate on that.
But I remember that story.
Yeah,
I sure
I was
remember
just
it.
bringing it up because it was a diversion, right?
Yeah, it was weird.
Like,
that's what I'm going to be getting at here. That was so weird how that happened, and it was out of the blue too.
It was crazy. And but you know, we were thrust into this leadership race, and all the candidates running for leader were, you know, axe the carbon tax, and Doug Ford was saying axe the carbon tax, respect the grassroots. And we're still see it 5 years later. Pierre Poilievre now every other day, axe the carbon tax, axe the carbon tax. Wow, that campaign and that taglines really had staying power. It's become a litmus test in conservative leadership races from 5 years ago. And so my wife ran, Belinda Karahalios. She became she won her nomination 2 weeks, became the MPP for the riding of Cambridge. But then three serious things happened. And we can go, like, that just took me 10 minutes just to describe the lawsuit. And each of these is going to take me a while, but I'm just going to do the Coles Notes version, then we can dig in. Sure. I ran for party president of the PCs in 2018. Doug did not clean out the PC party, the backroom. He left the same people in place. I ran against an old hand establishment guy who's been there since, I don't know, the Mike Harris days. Okay. They were really upset that I ran. But they let me run. And I went into convention, and they thought if the premier's office and the party staff were against me, there's no way I was going to win. And they had some deals cut with other figures, and they couldn't stop me. So they rigged it on the day of the convention in 2018. Fast forward 2019, my wife presents a private members bill to make voter fraud illegal inside political party elections, because there's no law against that. She's the MPP of Cambridge, first private members bill. We need a law, get rid of this voter fraud. They kill the bill. They vote in favor of it. They initially say they're against it. They vote in favor of it at second reading. Then they let it sit at a committee. They kill it. So now at this point, we're saying, wow, like, there's deep-rooted problems in this party. Like, if they can't even agree that voter fraud's a bad idea, we got serious problems. And then by 2020, let's skip through the conservative leadership race. It was being run by the prominent figures in the leadership campaign from Caroline Mulroney's provincial leadership race. They still had an axe to grind against me. And I caught fire in that conservative leadership race federally with the pledge to build, drill, build pipelines, and adapt when I was asked about climate change. And instead of taking a deal to help Erin O'Toole, they kicked me out of that race twice. They set me up and they kicked me out of that race twice. And a couple months later, they kicked my wife and the entire Cambridge PC board right out of the provincial party because she was the only current or former PC MPP to vote against the initial passing of Doug Ford's lockdown bill.
No, there's a lot to unpack there.
It's a lot. And then we started the New Blue Party. There you go. That's the 2-minute Coles Notes version. It's so much trending.
There is an important thing that I wanted to talk about with that federal race that you did for the Conservatives. I watched your Power and Politics interview, and you were right about the whole Erin O'Toole thing. Like this is forgotten history, even though it was only 2 years ago. But you were right about Erin O'Toole. You were right about Doug Ford. And not only that, it appears to me that the reason why you were ousted from the race in the first place is also because of Erin O'Toole. Is that true?
In the federal leadership?
Yes.
Yeah, so the two parties are completely different, right? Provincial, yes. The PC party, and then the Conservative Party of Canada. But in the back, a lot of the people overlap. And I saw this federal Conservative leadership race come up in 2020. And I'm watching Peter MacKay and Erin O'Toole are the front runners. And the other people in the race, Marilyn Gladue kind of had a bit of a profile in Southwestern Ontario. But the others are just, not very well known. And their Conservative credentials, their bona fides are not who knows who these people are. And I'm saying to myself, wow, like if we get a Peter MacKay or an Erin O'Toole as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, this is going to be bad. This is like big trouble. Luckily, anyway, we can get to how it ended up. They didn't suffer as much at the polls as I thought. So I jumped in the race to both look. It's consistent with what we said: challenge the left, balance the narrative in the leadership, and change the course of this, where the Conservative Party of Canada was going, and also the narrative of conservative politics across Canada. Because when that race started, no one was talking about axing the carbon tax. They were all tripping over themselves to prove who was the biggest liberal, and no one was balancing the narrative. And I jumped in, and they tried their best to ignore me. The National Post was in Erin O'Toole's pocket for that leadership race, and they tried to dismiss it. I remember reading the articles, like Global News and National Post put out a couple articles about who's in the Conservative leadership race in the beginning. And for me, he had a website called Axe the Carbon Tax. That's how they summarized a 2-year campaign to get the PC party to flip on the carbon tax temporarily. They said he had a website he ran called Axe the Carbon Tax. It was so funny the way they were trying to diminish my presence at the campaign. And look, the establishment figures, in hindsight, I realized this is what they were thinking. Well, let him run. He'll never raise the $300,000 entry fee, and he'll never get the 3,000 signatures. And because they could have just blocked me, but they let me run. And we were building, grassroots building. We weren't getting any media coverage. I was the last one to go on Power and Politics. I was the last one to go on, what's the other version, on CBC News. I was the last one to go on The Rebel. Those are the 3 interviews I did. And we were well on course to hit the 300,000. I was in 3rd place. There was some polling being done by the other campaigns. There was another poll that was being done that was made public. And in terms of fundraising, I was also 3rd. And on average donations, I was right behind Peter MacKay and ahead of Erin O'Toole. And Erin had all the establishment figures. All the Bay Street money that wasn't with MacKay was with Erin. And they set me up because I was calling Erin O'Toole a red Tory, and he was trying to run a campaign as a blue. And they were getting really angry with me. I remember the PC convention provincially happened in Niagara Falls right when the federal race started, right? And I just started getting signatures and donations. And Erin was there, and I don't think I'd ever met him. And, you see other leadership candidates, you're not going to be a jerk about it. You're going to be friendly, right? Hey, what's going on? And he gave me this glance from across the room, and it was so vicious. Like, he was so angry. And we had just gotten started. I was just saying he's a red Tory. He was campaigning for Patrick Brown for the carbon tax. He's not a blue conservative. He was so angry, guys. And I remember looking at it and turning to my wife saying, wow, like, this guy does not have the composure to be leader. Never mind prime minister, because if he's upset about a couple tweets and a couple Facebook posts this early in the campaign, he's going to lose his cool whenever the heat gets put on him. So we kept building, and in 4 to 6 weeks, we raised the 300,000. We're in third place. And then the pressure started happening. The calls started coming in my campaign from lobbyists and stuff saying, you got no chance. You can't win this. You need to cut a deal to support Aaron. And I said, why would I do that? I'm in this to win. I don't want to cut a deal to support Aaron. And I didn't take the deal. And they had a spy on my team who told me to send out this email that I had already circulated 4 weeks earlier in a mailing. And this is what the letter was. You could still find it online. It was simple. It was, Waleed Solomon is Aaron O'Toole's campaign chair. He was also in charge of the Ontario PC Party when that party had voter fraud going on, and they decided to sue me. And Waleed Solomon was at the top of the PC Party decision maker on those decisions. I think he would be bad for the grassroots of the Conservative Party of Canada based on his history. And oh, by the way, here's what he said in the Globe and Mail about Sharia law and Sharia finance. He believes that it's compatible with Canadian laws. And I quoted him and I said, I disagree. That's the extent of what I said. And I added 2 links to Toronto Sun articles written by Tariq Fatah on Sharia finance, Sharia law. So now I'm quoting articles in Post Media, and Post Media is all in on the Aaron O'Toole campaign. And even though the letter was out 4 weeks earlier in the mail, they had a guy on my team who told me, just send it out. You hadn't sent it out yet. So I was like, okay, I wasn't thinking about it. I sent it out in an email, and they made this big stink. An investigation was launched because I was Islamophobic, and I was this, I was that. Yeah, let's get into that, Brendan.
You forgot just that it's not just Islamophobic, but Islamophobic and racist, because you got to pair the two together every time you say it. It's just like you can't say trucker convoy without saying illegal trucker convoy.
Yes.
So, so that happened, and was that something that Aaron O'Toole's team specifically did because they saw you as a threat?
Well, the LEOC and Aaron O'Toole, the majority of the LEOC, which is the leadership organizing committee that ran the race, and Aaron O'Toole, like, they had to get me out of the race. I was in third place, and the combined vote of the final people that were on the ballot, if I was on that ballot in third place, it would have been me, Leslyn Lewis, and Derek Sloan after Peter and Aaron. I think I would have passed Aaron on the first ballot because my trajectory was straight up. And at that play, if I'm in second behind McKay, I think there's a good chance that I get most of the second place votes from Sloan and Lewis, and it's over. Like, it's over, and it comes down to me and McKay on the final ballot. And I think I would have won, but obviously I believe in myself, so who knows? Other people don't think it was possible, but they had to get me off the ballot because the 3 candidates running on the right would have defeated the 2 red Tories, Aaron O'Toole and Peter McKay. So even if you spin it a different way and you say, okay, Jim, he would have fallen back from third place and Leslyn Lewis would have been in third. If I was in fourth, the combined vote of Sloan, Lewis, and Jim would have launched Lewis ahead of O'Toole and McKay. But by kicking me out, a bunch of people said, forget it, I'm done. And it really dampened the spirits of people to participate in that race. But even more nefarious, they didn't want to. So they had all the money that I had raised for the leadership. And that money's either supposed to go to the buy-in to get on the final ballot, and then you can keep raising money, or it goes to pay campaign expenses, right? Because under elections law, you can't pay that money unless it comes from your donors. And the Conservative Party of Canada wasn't going to give me the donations or pay my expenses. So now they were trying to bankrupt me and put me offside Elections Canada law. So I had to go to court, and I went to court to get back on the ballot. I won. It was the first time I know of that someone had successfully sued a political party. Everyone else has failed. So now I've got 2 court victories, I guess, against political parties under my belt by 2020. Not really the kind of thing that I wanted to brag about by the time I hit 40. But anyway, and they kicked me out a second time. And the day that they kicked me out of the race, they paused the race for COVID. That was the exact same day. So the story of me getting kicked out of the race was, overtaken by the narrative of the Conservative Party of Canada pausing the race for COVID. So I went to court, I won, and then they kicked me out a second time. when the race started up again. And then 2 months later, they kicked Belinda out of the provincial caucus. Doug Ford did.
Yeah.
And wiped out our whole Cambridge PC board of volunteers, which most of them were on the federal leadership team that we were running out of Cambridge to begin with.
Now, I just have one more question, and then I'll let Rick get a word in. When it comes to Aaron O'Toole, he ended up adopting those carbon tax policies,
Right.
the carbon tax policy. He ended up adopting scrap Trudeau's very wide and scathing gun ban that he put in, defund the CBC. What was your reaction when he came in with an even worse carbon tax plan than the Liberals had? And he started walking back on all these promises that he made. And it, in my personal subjective opinion, it definitely made a lot of homeless Conservatives at that point. But what was your take on that?
So I remember in the leadership, there's been a long history, but he was copying my policies, and they had someone tipping them off on a couple policies, but I would say axe the carbon tax, and all of a sudden they'd rush out McKay and O'Toole. Oh yeah, I'm against the carbon tax too. Oh, sure you are. Sure you are. And then I had a policy. Remember in 2020, there was the blockades of the railroads, and I came up with a policy of, to make it illegal to block the railroads and critical infrastructure, right, at a federal level. And it was like an hour later, the O'Toole team op-ed in the National Post. 2 hours later, he came out with an email after I sent out the email 6:30 in the morning. 8:30, O'Toole runs with his. National Post covers O'Toole's promise, no promise for me. So I knew what he was all about. I knew the game plan here. So when he comes out later as the leader and he announces he's in favor of a carbon tax, and I was not shocked. Like, I knew that's why I was in the race, to prevent this from happening. And I knew, like, there was no way this guy was ever going to be the prime minister. And the sad part is, I think most of the people in the Conservative brass, like the party brass, they knew it too. Like, you could just tell that they weren't enthused about Aaron O'Toole, and they were playing to lose. Like, that's just as simple as that. They were playing to lose. And so I wasn't shocked, Brendan. I was just really worried that it was going to do long-standing damage to the Conservative movement to have this guy there. And I thought that it was going to lead to Trudeau majority having Aaron O'Toole or Peter MacKay as leader. It didn't. So, but now Trudeau's gotten his majority another way with cutting a backroom deal with Singh. So he figured out a way to do it. And look, the Conservative Party of Canada, none of the MPs in caucus decided to say anything. They privately were telling their constituents, oh no, Jim should have been allowed to run. Publicly, they said nothing. And now they're trying to make up for it, right? Like, they got rid of Aaron O'Toole, and you see the leadership going on, and Pierre Poilievre every other day is saying, axe the carbon tax. I'm flattered that he's talking about pipelines and axing the carbon tax. And let's see if he keeps it up. I don't know. But we've decided to focus on provincial politics. And I believe that we can change and influence the narrative, not just in Ontario politics, but federally and nationally in our country, starting from a provincial base, because all politics is local. And I just went through the example federally of how we laid out those principles. And I think we are still doing that. We're changing the narrative.
So you just introduced your new blueprint. Can you kind of outline what that is? What is your platform?
So our platform is called the New Blueprint. We've been working on the platform for quite a while. We've put out what we would say the most important issues that we wanted to highlight on one page. And so there'll be more details to come. But we want to get the highlights out in one page. And we've kind of I've suspected for a long time that for the last couple of years that Doug Ford, as we get to 2022, was going to start running back from these COVID promises or the COVID history, the lockdown, the mandates. And so we also have a track record of comprehensively challenging the establishment, not just on one topic or one issue or one stream of what you would say, a narrative or policy issue. So we've put out the new blueprint, and it's comprehensive. It's covering social policy, fiscal policy, and the issue with the establishment media, for example. So right off the bat, Belinda was the first and only current or former PC MPP to vote against Doug Ford's lockdown bill. So obviously, we're against the lockdowns and everything that's come with it. And we're going to repeal all the laws that Doug Ford's put in place under the guise of COVID in the last 2 years. But we also believe we've got to take it a step further. This idea that COVID vaccine passports are now optional now, so it's okay and up to a private individual or business or public facility to make that decision, that's not good enough. So we've committed right off the top with the new blueprint that we're going to use legislation and fines to make the use of vaccine passports illegal. And we're also going to look at reducing the powers of local bureaucrats and restitution for those harmed by Trudeau and Ford's lockdowns and state of emergencies, especially like most recently the ones after the trucker convoy, right? Like the Ford government just without due process shut down trucking businesses. Reprehensible. They did that right before they lifted the state of emergency. And of course, that all comes with, we wrap up undoing what he's done under the lockdown. Digital ID falls into that, right? Opposing that. But the other aspects of our campaign are renewing political accountability, defunding the establishment media, and both of those are part and parcel with the backroom deals we see with lobbyists behind the scenes controlling the political party process. And then the final four promises are about growing Ontario's economy, providing tax relief for the individual, doing something about our education system, and stopping this woke activism in education and offering choice to parents, supporting parents who make other choices for their kids who've the public school system's not working for them, and especially the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And of course, healthcare, clearing up the backlogs of what we've seen. So we've got specific promises under each of them, and we're really proud of the new blueprint. But there's one that I'll tell you that really opens the eyes of voters. In 2020, the Toronto Star was going bankrupt. They were like a penny stock on the stock market. And they were in trouble. And there were these articles about the Toronto Star can't sell papers. No one wants to read the junk they're putting out there. And they're so infamous, the Toronto Star, kind of like the Aaron O'Toole's of the world, the cancel culture. They attack someone, but they don't quote what the person said, right? And that's what Aaron O'Toole did when he kicked me out of the federal leadership. And the Toronto Star was happy to run a couple articles and op-eds attacking me in that leadership without quoting what I ever said. And you'll see this pattern continually with people that attack me and the New Blue Party is they attack us and they call us names, but they never quote what we say. That's factually incorrect. It's a tool of the left. It's unfortunate it's embraced by conservatives. But getting back to the Star, they were bought by a private equity firm and pulled off the stock market, I think last year. And we were told that they had, terrible covers of the paper. And we were told that they had a business plan in mind to save the Toronto Star. And so they're out there saying nasty things about people who won't go with the establishment line, putting tight cover pages like we're just seeing here, promoting the idea that we should tax the unvaccinated. And what does Doug Ford and the PC party do? They go and they issue the first online gambling license in Ontario's history, because now online gambling is legal because of Justin Trudeau, and it's up to the provinces to issue the license. And they issue the first online gambling license to the Toronto Star. And the Toronto Star for months has been bragging about how it's going to save their business and it's going to fund their crap that they write in their paper, social justice, under the guise of social justice journalism. And they're going to do it on the backs of exploiting the very people they pretend to support, because a large disproportionate number of people who are into online gambling are the ones that are struggling to make ends meet. And Doug Ford gave him this license, first online gambling license. And then he followed it up with the Liberal lobbyist that was representing the Star. Doug Ford appointed him to be the head of the Ontario Lottery Gaming Commission. In the meet and greets I've been going to as we're ready to get into this campaign, a couple hundred people, hundreds of people in attendance, when I tell them that, it's like it's the highlight or the paramount example of how this Ontario PC party has totally lost course and they're beyond redemption. That is something that's not being pressured by anyone for this guy to save the Toronto Star. And this PC government is bailing out the Toronto Star. So while conservatives across Canada are saying we should defund the media federally, or we should get rid of that taxpayer subsidy that Justin Trudeau has for the establishment media, instead of being principled, Doug Ford and the PCs have found another way to fund the media provincially, which is by handing out an online gambling license. So that's part of the new blueprint. We're going to get rid of the Toronto Stars, scrap it, that online gambling license. If they can't sell papers, they should go bankrupt.
Yeah. I mean, it's a business just like any other. It's very competitive. But I'm very fond of the expression, if you go woke, you go broke. So
Right.
Just
well, I'm really eager to get into Bill 100 and what happened last night. Can you kind of walk us through what happened from your perspective?
I'll tell you as much as we know. Bill 100 came up, and that's the bill that Doug Ford put in place as he was wrapping up the state of emergency that he called for the trucker convoy. And I was in Ottawa, spoke at that trucker convoy. Actually, the first weekend it was there, I was there, and the New Blue Party was able to get some microphones and speakers on a flatbed, and Ezra spoke and others, because there was no mic set up on that first day. So we're happy to help out. And, he came out with a state of emergency, and he was quickly trying to wrap that up. And he introduced Bill 100 to give the government some of those powers going forward, which is basically clamping down on businesses or others that are somehow connected to any kind of protest going forward without any due process. So he's trying to make these things permanent under Bill 100. And my wife, Belinda, the MPP of the riding of Cambridge, voted against it and debated against it at second reading, which is the first opportunity to talk about the bill. And then it was going into third reading. But they had passed a motion with the help of the NDP and the Liberals a couple of weeks ago, where at any moment they can extend debate and votes on a piece of legislation past 6 o'clock. And so that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is it's part of the orders, or the standing orders, or the rules, whatever you want to call them, of the legislature, that the House Leader of the government, so the PC's House Leader, supposed to inform the other MPPs what's on the agenda for the week ahead. And I still can't wrap my head around how these orders can be ignored whenever they feel like it. But they've been doing this to Belinda for the last year and a half, where they will inform the other MPPs what's going on and withhold the information from Belinda. And we've seen the Liberals and the NDP and the PCs gang up on Belinda before and try to sneak motions in to say, if you don't wear a mask, you can't be here. And they snuck that one through. Or the other one was, if you're not vaccinated, you can't be here. And a lot of times she's the only one speaking out for a long time, right? Because some of the stuff didn't impact Roman, and Randy wasn't in the legislature for whatever. We don't need to get into the details of that. But so sometimes Belinda had to be there from 9 till 6 every day, and then after 6 for a year and a half to make sure. And at some points when they catch her off guard, they sneak stuff in. And last night was one of those times. They didn't mention anything about the agenda for the week. She was there asking them about critical race theory in the morning. And seemingly the debate was going to end at 6 o'clock. They were scheduled to come back after next week. So next week's constituency break, they're scheduled to come back the week after to sit and debate. But they decided they're going to have the third and final debate and vote on Bill 100 last night at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night. No notice to the MPPs, or at least my wife didn't get notice. I don't know about some of the others. There was at least one independent who got notice. And that's a whole other topic of how he was able to figure out that it was going on at 9 o'clock at night. And they passed it with very little scrutiny. And so at second reading, Belinda, Roman Baber, Lindsay Park, and the Green MPP were able to get together and stand up and add some scrutiny to the bill passing, because they were given courtesy to know that it was coming up. But on third reading, they broke their own rules. The Ford PCs extended the vote at night yesterday, passed it without any scrutiny. I don't think there's been any media coverage on it, and Belinda wasn't able to hold their feet to the fire and debate against it last night. Yeah, go ahead,
We,
Brendan.
we can say that there was media coverage on it because we
Okay,
broke the
good.
story today at noon.
Good for you guys. That's great.
Well, we didn't. I don't know if we broke it, but we certainly reported on it. Can't
Yeah.
say for sure that we were the first,
No,
but
not the first.
I
no.
know that you were putting out messages about it early this morning. So, and it certainly is a concern, huge concern for me, because it seems to be a direct assault on freedom. It strips away more rights. It directly targets protests, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It gives broad sweeping powers to police officers to lay charges and basically convict people on the spot, confiscate property, including vehicles, driver's licenses, even take people off to jail. And the fines are substantial. Some of these penalties are up to 10 years in jail for some of the offenses that they're outlining. Am I off the mark here? Am I interpreting this correctly?
No, they already have these tools, right? If a protest is blocking the bridge to the United States, they have these powers federally, provincially. But what they're doing in this bill is they're saying they're getting rid of all due process. So just shut down your business, right? Or if you happen to be donating to someone that's in a protest, or I don't know, the problem with these bills, guys, is they're so broad that you can't even predict how they're going to be used, right? That's the ultimate problem. So you can get all the lawyers you want, but they're just only going to give you a guess, right? So if someone lives in your home, or someone is out of a job and they're living with you, your son or your daughter, and they happen to go to this protest, does this bill mean that they can go after the person feeding the unemployed person, or can they go after the employer of the person? Who knows? These guys are just making up these broad laws, stuffing him into a bill, and the whole giveaway with that bill. There's a line in there that says, in 12 months, the government has to review how the bill was used. That's a straight up giveaway of they have no idea what they're doing, because they're putting in the bill as a defense to any legal proceedings to say it's unconstitutional. They're putting right into the bill this idea of a review of how the enforcement of the bill is happening as like a backup plan to any arguments in court. But by that time, guys, in 12 months, who knows, right? The effect of this bill is to put a chill on people getting involved in the political process. That's the effect. And it actually worked, because after the trucker convoy, we started naming candidates for the New Blue Party. And we were at, I think, close to 115 back in January or February. Sorry, I can't remember the exact date. But after the trucker convoy and Doug Ford doing state of the emergency, we had a couple candidates who backed out, a few candidates who backed out and said, I don't know, like, what does this mean? Are they going to come after us? And it's not accurate. There shouldn't be any concern when you get involved in the political process that's the case. It's different, comparing two different things. But this is what this is designed to do, put a chill. And it's not informing people accurately as to what's in the bill. And, most Ontarians are busy working and taking their kids to school and feeding their families. They're not going to sit there and decipher what's provincial jurisdiction and federal jurisdiction. So a lot of people think that what's in this bill is also the stuff that Justin Trudeau is doing federally. And so it's causing a lot of confusion. It's a terrible, terrible bill. And they didn't want any scrutiny. And they passed it last night, really late at night, 8, 9 o'clock, when every MPP thinks it's time to go. And then today, what they did, they put a last minute motion near the end of the day to say, oh, we're not going to come back to the legislature for 2 weeks. So they're going to come back April 28th. Instead of more question period before the election, they're going to come back April 28th, they say, do a couple of days for the budget, and then jump into the election campaign. It baffles the mind how a government can just, willy-nilly change the democratic process and accountability in the legislature, shut it down, go after hours, do whatever they want to avoid scrutiny. The whole system of how they've really destroyed it provincially has to be reviewed and looked at, because it's a lot different than federally.
Well, it certainly seems unconstitutional to me. I don't see how you just do away with a due process.
Yeah, but the problem is, you go through court, it'll take you a year or two, right?
Yeah.
And I've been saying to people that have been asking for a couple of years, the courts is the way we got to go. Jim, you're a lawyer, and I wasn't a litigator. I'm not a litigator. I did other types of law, but they would say, why isn't the New Blue Party starting a lawsuit? The solution here is not in court, because the court, it's a grinder, right? And you make one mistake, like we've seen with some of these court cases, you make one mistake in the process, and the government has all the tools and all the weapons. They can just punch it out on a technicality, right? It's a political question. And come June 2nd in the provincial election in Ontario, if we don't have a candidate in every riding, the PCs and the establishment parties are just going to say, see, we could do whatever we want. There's no impact. It doesn't cost us any votes. And so the solution has to be political. There has to be a place for people who are not happy with this stuff to both hear from someone and a political party and candidates a different alternative, and also an option at the polls. So one part that I constantly am trying to provide an alternative viewpoint to is this idea that people should give up on politics. You can't give up. Like, that's why the vote's there. You can't give up on it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is something I have been seeing across the board. When I put out that we were going to do this show today, I put it all over the internet today. And some of the feedback was, oh, why waste your time with elections? It's all bad. There was another one that was saying, oh, stick with the devil that you know as opposed to the devil you don't know. What are some things that you can say about that? I mean, Randy Hillier did put out a post as well saying that he has given up on a political solution. You seem to believe in the political solution. Would you be able to outline why or make an argument for it?
Yeah, well, I think it's unfair to call me the devil. I mean, so to those people who say stick to the devil, I'm just joking around.
I'm talking about Doug Ford.
Yeah, I mean, there's a conflicting narrative, right? Because on one hand, people say we want politicians to speak the truth. We want politicians to stand on principle, right? Mm-hmm. And then you offer them that. And my wife is an MPP, and she offers that. And so if you want more politicians to do that, don't just, pull shoot when they do that and say, forget it. It's hopeless anyway, because you're going to reinforce the idea that why would another politician do that if they think that people are just going to give up on the process, right? So we want politicians to stick to principle and stick to their commitments. And also people need to stick to the commitments of their politicians and say, Belinda voted against the bill and is standing on principle on many matters, and we support her. And she's getting that in Cambridge, and we're getting that across Ontario. So I'm not trying to make it sound like we're not getting that. But that's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing I'd like to say is it enables, the establishment loves it when there are speakers out there saying, give up on politics, check out. Don't vote for a political party, vote for an independent, is what I heard at a meet and greet yesterday from a lawyer. I couldn't even believe a lawyer said that, which makes me wonder what he was really, what his real agenda was. And the establishment political parties love it when people don't vote. They love it. 45% sometimes don't vote, anywhere between 35 to 45%, right? And so the vote is decided, and there's no such thing as a vote. There's voters, by a small group of people. And so you can't check out. The other thing I'll say is I've seen it work. I've seen through Belinda in the legislature as a sole MPP standing up and saying something. And then we reach out to thousands of people who are following us in emails, social media, and we say, push back, call your MPP, do it in the democratic process. And when the establishment parties know that someone's watching, they really change their tune really, really quickly a lot of times. Not always, depending on what they're planning and what they're doing, but it works. And the problem we have here is that the existing parties have brands that are over 100 years old, and the New Blue Party just started a year and a half ago. And we've got a lot of catching up to do just with time, but it works. And we just have to keep to it. And look, a lot of people are desperate. A lot of people were hurt very, very badly in the last 2 years. And not just with jobs and educations and careers. I mean, the worst call that I got was a woman in East York who lost her mom because her mom was in a coma to COVID. And she heard that we were promoting the fact that monoclonal antibody treatment had finally arrived to Ontario, and the government wasn't promoting it. widely enough. And we were, because we found out about it in Hamilton. And by the time she called New Blue, she left a message. I called her back within 30 minutes. My team said, hey, SOS, stop what you're doing. She was in tears. It was too late. Mom was in a coma, couldn't get it. It's so disgusting, right? Like that person wouldn't know where to reach. But we have to ensure that people have an option and don't disengage. And if we push, things do have the opportunity to shift. The narrative can change. We can change the course. But people are desperate. They want a quick solution. And some of this stuff, it's going to happen sooner than people think, but it takes work. It takes time. And it has to happen in every riding, in every town across Ontario.
And you have made a difference even on Bill C-67 already.
Well,
right?
Yeah.
You've kind of forced the hand of the Conservatives on that piece of legislation.
Yeah, I think that's an important example. There's been a few examples over the last year and a half and over the last 5 years. But it's all, there's two things I'll say to Bill 67. Some of the apologists for the PCs will say, and there's a lot of them out there, and a lot of them sound like they're on side with us on the issues, but they like to provide cover for the PCs for whatever reason. They'll say a couple of things. They'll say, well, the bill won't pass, so it doesn't matter, right? Or they'll say the PCs got fooled into voting for critical race theory. Or they'll say the bill's not so bad. Or they'll say the culture's against us. We just got to do what we can. It's not just whether the bill becomes law. It's also forcing those politicians to take a side on the bill publicly. Because when you force their hand and they have to defend it or oppose it, you're now setting the tone for the next time someone comes up with a crazy idea like Bill 67 to fine students or anyone else in the education system for something that's subconsciously racist. But before Belinda voted against Bill 67 and she got ridiculed for being the only one to vote against it, no one was covering the bill. There were a couple articles. I think True North Center had one article or two, and it was very under the radar, right? It wasn't discussed very much. And the day the bill passed, there was not a lot of coverage outside of, I don't know, I think the Toronto Star ran something about this racial equity bill and how great it is. It passed second reading, except for one weird MPP that voted against it. And if Belinda didn't vote against it, maybe there would have been less coverage on it. But by her voting against it and us calling out the other MPPs on the PC side and others, like Rick Nichols, who voted for it, then the scrutiny came. Then people started talking about it. Then the professors took to the podcast circuit to start talking about it and apologize for the PCs and say this bill was complicated. It wasn't complicated. But
no, to your point there, and I mentioned this on the broadcast because we did talk about it before. This is only 9 pages.
Right. 9-page bill. And you just screen through it and the word fine, we will fine you is in there. Fine.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone who just skims it can find the word fine. And the other part of it, even if you don't understand the bill, right, and it's complicated, the debate, if you read the debate, and the PC MPPs were sitting in the debate, and Rick Nichols was there, okay? And here's some of the language that's being used by the NDP MPP who brought it forward. If we perpetuate the existing system of education, which is systemically racist, she said this, and I quote, it is extending colonial violence. And she kept calling it colonialism.
Oh, God.
Right there. Like someone is sitting there in front of you telling you the education system pushes colonial violence. It's crazy. And then to follow it up, Sam Oosterhoff, who's the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Education on the PC side, commending her and saying, I can't wait to pass this bill and make it law. 2 other PC MPPs say, can't wait to support this bill. So this idea that they didn't know what they were, that they were tricked, is totally an apology campaign by certain people protecting the PC MPPs. And I'm so sorry to say that Professor Dave Haskell's one of these guys who lives right in Cambridge, who is running for the PPC and was happy to come to our house in a meet and greet to shake hands. when he needed the votes from people that supported Jim Belinda. And he took to the podcast circuit to pretend that he had no idea who Belinda was, no idea who the New Blue was, and to apologize for the PC MPPs and say they didn't know what they were voting for. It's bogus. They knew exactly what they were voting for. And so the important thing is we called it out, and Belinda went back yesterday and asked them about the bill and got the House leader to admit on the record that they're not going to support the government bill. And even if they weren't going to pass it quietly, it's important to pin it on them to say what their position is, to get them to climb back and admit that the bill is wrong. So that next time some Yahoo comes up with this idea, crazy idea to fine kids, at least it's on the record that it's a terrible idea. That's another aspect of why it's important. So, we're just doing it on the shoulders of the thousands of people, Rick and Brendan, across Ontario that are awake, that are paying attention, that are calling their PC MPPs, and they're supporting us. And as long as we have that support, we'll keep going. It's important.
Would it be fair to say, this is for you, for Rick, and for you, Jim? So would it be fair to say that looking at this bill, we can now officiate the term Orange Tory? Now a thing.
We should start coining that one. Yeah, they're far beyond red Tories, right?
Yeah.
They're orange. I don't even know. Closet something. I don't know.
That's pretty good, Brendan. I like that.
A good one. They're definitely, the PCs have made a decision that they're trying to replace their base of voter, and the 2.3 million voters that voted for them in 2018, which is a record. They have contempt for those voters, and they're trying to replace them with left-wing voters. It's as simple as that. They're aggressively trying to do that with bills like this and other left-wing policies, whether it's fiscal or social.
So I'm concerned as a conservative.
Tell me, Rick.
Tell me about it.
I'm concerned because people vote for brands, as I often say. And so I don't know how we cut through and convince people to not vote en masse for Doug Ford again, and especially when we have the New Blue, we have the Ontario Party, we have is the Populist Party of Ontario even really a thing at this point? Are they even registered? I'm hearing about it, but I don't know if that's even really happening. But it's fragmented on the conservative side, is what I'm saying. And then beyond that, you just have people who just vote out of habit, vote because they recognize the brand. And I don't see any difference, honestly, between the conservatives. I see subtle differences between the conservatives, the Libs, and the NDP. But really, they're all in bed together these days. So where do we find the hope?
So it's not fragmented. It's fragmented if you're just looking at Twitter profile. Someone puts up a website and calls something a populist party. It's not fragmented because you know what you can't do? You can't fragment zero. You can't split zero. And the other parties that you mentioned are at zero. And Derek Sloan's a zero. And you can't split the vote at zero. So that's a good thing about zero. You can't divide zero. The New Blue Party is the only alternative to the PCs. And right now we're 2 ridings or 3 ridings away from a full slate on the campaign. Not even the NDP have announced candidates in every riding. And we've got a couple ridings to go: Timmins, Thunder Bay, Scarborough. If any of your listeners or watchers are interested and know people in those parts of the province, want to run in the next election, newblueontario.com. And it's important that a political party emerges that challenges the establishment, that has a candidate in every single riding, and that's what we've been building on. So the key question to your question, I think, is awareness, because you're right. New Blue Party is a new party, a year and a half. How is the voter in Ontario who's not following politics as closely as us because they're normal and because they're working and because they have to take their kids to school and they're busy, right? And we just had a conference a couple of weeks ago where we went through extensive training for 3 days for our candidates. And we've been working on this for a year and a half, guys. So we've got all the material that you need on a marketing level is all out there. Radio ads are playing across Ontario. Video ads are playing on Facebook and social media, where you get a much better bang for your buck than television. And then there's the grassroots strategy. And we've been putting it into our the plan, into our candidates, that you've got to take it direct to voter, because no one's going to gift it to us. No one's going to make it easy. But the good news, Rick and Brendan, is that more people that hear about our party, if I can use a sales term, guys, you know, the what's it called in sales when you convert the sale and you can switch from, you know, a lead to
it's a conversion.
Yeah, conversion, right? That's the word. Thanks, Rick. Our challenge is awareness. It's not convincing people, because once they hear about the New Blue Party and the new blueprint, the things we stand for, we've got a very, very good support. And it starts at home in Cambridge, where Belinda's the MPP, and she's had very good support. And we're optimistic that things will go well there. And it's reaching out to other ridings, even in places where we thought, you know, I wasn't well for the last year and a half, and I wasn't able to get out to Eastern Ontario, but I've been there twice in the last week and getting good crowds. And all over the place, we're getting good crowds and good support. But we just got to work hard. There's not going to be any shortcuts. There's not going to be one quick thing, you know, stunt in the media that's going to make us a household name. It's hard work, and we just got to stick to the principles. And if we do that, we'll do a breakthrough. We will have a breakthrough. I can't predict, guys, how quickly the breakthrough is going to happen, but I can tell you that if we stop doing what we're doing, things will get worse a whole lot faster than they're getting.
Well, it is clear that you guys are the most organized of the new parties by far.
Yeah.
And I am impressed with the professionalism, the caliber of the material you've produced. You clearly have your act together. So I have to tip my hat to you that way, for sure.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And that's kind of the what would I call it? The window covers of what's really going on. But none of that is possible, the videos, the organization, without the values and the principles that keep our party connected. And so the other thing that's different about our party and the others that you're talking about is there's a couple things. We're running on a comprehensive platform, and we're running candidates in every riding. And a comprehensive platform means you talk about the $100 million that the establishment parties have taken to fund taxpayer money they've taken over the last 10 years to fund themselves. And we're going to cancel that per vote subsidy. You talk about the Toronto Star. You talk about the lobbyists and the voter fraud in internal party politics. You talk about all the issues, and that's what we're doing. The other guys are not talking about that stuff. And that's by design, because they are continuously apologizing for the establishment. They'll pick on Doug Ford, but they won't get after the establishment. We have an express commitment to replace the Ontario PC Party, because you can't reform it from the inside. The other guys come up with excuses. They apologize for the Ford PCs voting in favor of critical race theory, and they do not challenge them comprehensively like we do for the things that they're doing behind the deals and the deal cutting that they're doing behind the deals, because they're not actually in it to win. They're in it to undermine what the New Blue is doing and try to stall our growth. But if we'll just stick to what we're doing and work hard and be committed to the values and principles, and that's how we get people behind us to support us to put together the things that we're putting together.
So are you saying that the Sloan Nichols Ontario Party team is really sort of a controlled opposition?
You use the term that you want to use, but in the last 2 days, Rick Nichols, two things happened the last 2 days. The House Leader of the PCs and another MPP today, I think it was the Finance Minister. No, the House Leader again today. So in the last 2 days, the House Leader at Queen's Park commended and congratulated Rick Nichols for speeches he put in the legislature. Right? Defended him and then said, what a great speech that was. Twice in 2 days.
Interesting.
Questions that my wife was asking him. And then the other thing that happened last night is Rick Nichols, somehow he found out that the vote on Bill 100 was happening at 8 or 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. And he was there to vote against it. So how did he find out that the vote was happening? And Belinda didn't. The reality is, if you listen to the discourse and what they say and what their candidates are talking about, Their Twitter profile and the candidates that are running for Sloan and Nichols, that they're targeting New Blue candidates. That's what they're doing. And they're trying to put people into ridings where New Blue has strong candidates. You look at all their social media engagement, all the things they talk about. They don't talk about the voting record of the PCs. You know what they talk about, guys? They talk about stuff like the World Economic Forum, Communist China. They talk about global things that have nothing to do with the mandate of a provincial politician. And you know what that's designed to do? That's designed to take the heat off Doug Ford and the PC MPPs and to distract the people that are desperate for a change, that are desperate to rally behind politicians, to distract them and say, oh yeah, Communist China is a problem, but to distract them away from the voting record and what the PCs and their MPPs are doing at the legislature. And if you listen to clearly, it's right there in the language that they talk about when their candidates are on podcasts or at speaking on whatever they're doing.
I just want to point out that's what he sent out today.
Yeah.
Because somehow I'm on a mailing list. I'm not part of their party, but I'm on their mailing list.
Well, when you're working with the establishment, Rick, you get any mailing list you want. That's the truth of the matter.
Yeah. But he's talking about Chinese investment in farmland here.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing that I saw that I thought it was confusing, and maybe I'm
mass
out to lunch. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What the heck does that have to do with the provincial government? Like,
very popular with the conservative voter. Nothing to do with provincial politics. So why would he do that? Why would Derek Sloan not talk about Toronto Star getting a casino license, not talk about voter fraud internally, not talk about critical race theory in Bill 67, not tell his one MPP, Rick, this bill's coming up for a vote. Let's get on the same page as this, right? Why? Why would he do that? Because they're not actually working to fight the PC MPP, the PC party. They're working to fight us. They're doing attack pieces against the New Blue party, and they're not doing any attack pieces against the Ontario PC party outside of a couple of tweets and mentioning Doug Ford's name in an email. And this is not new. Like Derek Sloan has made a career. He was in that conservative leadership race. He didn't get disqualified, even though he made some inflammatory statement about Theresa Tam. Was way worse than me saying Waleed Solomon agrees with Sharia finance. He didn't get disqualified because he had a deal to support Aaron O'Toole. So he spent the rest of that leadership, him and the group behind him, Parents as First Educators, attacking Leslyn Lewis over and over again in that leadership to suppress the second ballot support from Sloan to Lewis. And it worked. And she could have passed Aaron O'Toole on that ballot. But 21% of the Sloan voter went to O'Toole instead. And he's just continuing the same thing. And look, guys, let me back it up here for a second. Let's take what Derek Sloan is saying at face value, right? Let's say I am wrong and everything he says is true, okay? And he's out there saying can't work with Jim Karahalios, right? He put a proposal forward for the New Blue Party saying we should work together, right? And I never reached out to him, he says, in September, October, November to have a coffee, catch up, water under the bridge, the federal leadership when they had a spy on my team. He claims that never happened. He claims I never offered to meet. And they put a proposal forward when we had over 100 candidates. And he wanted me to cancel some of our candidates, which I would never do to our own team. Let's say all of what Derek Sloan is saying is true, that he wanted to participate with the New Blue. And we said no, right? Back in September, October. Okay.
Yeah.
And he's a federal politician who just lost an election, right? So at the same time that they're saying that, they're claiming, and the team around them is claiming, that this is the most important election in Ontario's history. That's what they're saying, right? And so their solution to that is to say, well, Jim wouldn't let me have a primary leadership role in the New Blue. So my solution is to create another party at the last minute and start popping in candidates wherever I can, because it is paramount importance to me, Derek Sloan, that I lead something into this election. Isn't that kind of contradictory, guys, right? Isn't his own argument conflicting with with what he's saying, because on the one hand, he's saying this is the most important election of our lifetime. And he knows the New Blue Party's close to getting a full slate of candidates. And he knows that we're getting tracked by pollsters and we're way ahead of them, both in the video ads that we have, the radio ads, 121 candidates. And yet he's telling his own people that I don't care that this is the most important election ever. I now want to be a provincial politician in Ontario. And if they don't let me into the New Blue, I'm going to start my own thing. And all the people of Ontario are going to suffer for it. That's what he's claiming. Is that the mark of a leader, guys? Is that the mark of someone who's really doing it for the right reasons and doing it for the cause and doing it for the people of Ontario? Or is that the mark of someone who's doing it for himself, right? So his own logic, which is totally false because he's lying about what he's saying, but let's just take him at face value. His own logic is contradictory. The other thing that's faulty of his logic is just yesterday now, he's taking personal attacks at my character without disputing anything that I've said is false. He can't pin one line that I've said that's false. That's not factual. So he's taking personal shots at me. And in the same breath, he's saying, Jim is nuts, but I wanted to work with him a month ago. Come on.
I appreciate much of where you're coming from.
Tell me, Brendan, challenge me.
And I am restrained in the sense that we operate a broadcast, and I mean, there's so many things. I mean, Rick is more of the pro than I am on that, but we made a lot of comments there, and here
it's okay. We're not going to get sued yet.
Okay.
I'm not saying anything, guys. I can't back up, but go ahead.
Yep,
it's all my opinion too.
No, you're doing great, and I really appreciate your insight and how I love political mudslinging as much as the next person. I'm not going to stop it. I mean, that's fine. We talked about, they talk about communism and that sort of thing as a distraction. But when you look at the NDP and you look at this Stephen Del Duca, these people are frightening. Like these are the people who will mask you up, lock you in your house, and you'll never be able to leave again. It'll be like Shanghai all over Ontario if we elect these people. I solely feel that is the real danger
of a new party.
Beg your pardon?
Of a new party. That's the danger of a new party.
No, the danger is the Liberal Party and the NDP. Right. I'm concerned about those guys because they'll lock us up and jab us up for the rest of our lives. And seriously, I'm not interested in it. And I hope the rest of Ontario isn't interested in it. Don't you think that they're the real threat here, that we should really be concerned about those guys?
That is a rational argument, and the motivation of the apologists and the ones opposing New Blue, that's what they're probably thinking, outside of whatever nefarious deals they have in the back to fund their operations, which we can only speculate on. That's one rational argument, that we just got to stick to the PC party, like you said earlier, because it's the best we can get, right? And that's a rational argument. So they should be out there. Derek Sloan should be out there saying we got to stick with the PC party because it's the best we can get. And Derek finished fifth in a conservative leadership race when there were only 4 candidates on the ballot, and he should say I can't win, so we should just stick to the PCs, and this is as good as we can get. Look, the reality is, though, when you look at the record of the PCs, the Liberals, the NDP when they've been in power in Ontario, the Ontario PC party has a greater deficit, excluding COVID spending, and has spent more, excluding COVID relief spending, than the Liberals did in any year prior for 15 years in power. On every single file, fiscal, social, with lobbyists, with establishment media, they are farther to the left than the Liberals. So when you're looking at PC, Liberal, NDP, if you're thinking historically what those brands stood for, then Brendan, there might be an argument there with what you're saying. But right now, those 3 parties,
I think my question should be rephrased a little bit here, because what I meant to come off as is, don't you think that political mudslinging would be better aimed at these guys, and it would definitely be really easy to do, because I mean, here I am on their website. These are the things that they're going to push forward. It's going to be social justice for the rest of our lives. I mean, shouldn't we be going after these guys instead of worrying about Derek Sloan and that sort of thing? And
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well,
yeah,
you got to respond to attacks. And that's what the New Blue Party's doing. Like, we are challenging these ideas from the Liberals and the PCs, and whether it has a red banner on it or whether it's repackaged as a PC plan, we challenge the left, regardless of the color of the party. The Bill 67 was an NDP bill, right? And Belinda voted against it and went toe-to-toe with the NDP MPP. That's, I think, 2 ridings over from her riding in KW in Kitchener-Waterloo, went toe-to-toe, and she got the NDP MPP to back off. So that's where our focus is. Unfortunately, these other guys who have some profile because they've got establishment forces behind them, they're coming in and they're attacking and they're sabotaging and they're trying to run candidates against our candidates. And so as the leader, guys, I got an obligation to not only defend my family and my wife from this stuff happening over and over, but I have an obligation to defend my candidates and defend our party and defend the values and everything we've worked on. So whether I see the enemy, Brendan, in front of me is the left, and they're open about it. They're like, red, orange sign. Here I am. This is what I'm calling for, critical race theory. The enemy's in front of me, or the enemy's to my right or to my left in disguise. And they're trying to sabotage, whether it's the PCs on one side who are pretending they're not for this stuff, but are actually pushing it harder than the Liberals before, or if it's others that are trying to distract and divide the movement at the last minute. My obligation is to call it out because we've got an important election on June 2nd. And I can't stick my head in the sand and say, I don't know what's going on and pretend, because that's the easier thing to do. It's easier for me to tell people, I don't know why this is happening. What can we do? Okay, let's fold up shop. Let's fire half of the New Blue candidates before the election and only run 50 or 60. Pretend we put up a good fight and then just say, oh, it didn't work out, guys. That's the easy thing to do. But I have an obligation. And let me tell you one more thing. If I'm not going to defend my wife, my family, our values, my candidates, and our party, and the work we've done for a year and a half, am I going to defend Ontarians? So when they're calling me out, when Tom Marazzo's taking shots at me in a whisper campaign and putting out a video, I'm going to defend what we've built, and I'm going to explain the record. And you're right. It's a distraction, Brendan. It's totally a distraction. And we try to not spend any time on it. But when we come on podcasts like this and everyone knows the characters, we talk about it because they've driven the issue. They've decided to insert themselves in the process. And here's a great quote Tom said. And I spoke to Tom back in October, November, guys. And I thought he was a good guy. And I said, Tom, you want to run for the New Blue? I spent an hour on the phone with him explaining provincial politics. And up until December, Tom was texting me saying he's right with Belinda. He's right with New Blue. And I don't know what happened. And he went sideways and took to social media to attack us. He never called. Marazzo never called to say, Jim, I got an issue. Jim, I'm hearing this about you. He never picked up the phone. He has my cell, right? Just went silent. And so he put out a tweet a couple weeks ago saying, lead, follow, or get out of the way. Okay? That's what he said. From a man of leadership. So my response to Tom Marazzo and Derek Sloan and Rick Nichols and the rest of the gang over there is when Belinda was the first person to vote against Doug Ford's lockdown bill, when none of them were doing anything, she was leading. And those guys decided for a year and a half not to follow. And now they're in the way. So they should take their own advice, whether it's Jordan Peterson saying, speak the truth, one of his rules, or whether it's lead, follow, or get out of the way that Marazzo says, and get out of the way. Because you are in the way and you're just covering for the PCs, and we're going right to June 2nd with 124 candidates and beyond June 2nd. So guys, I know it's not easy talking about this stuff.
No, it isn't. And
I'm trying to. We had Tom on the program, and I mean, it seems to me you guys have been on the same side until maybe just recently now.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to the truckers convoy for me. And I'd really like your take on the Freedom Convoy, the demonstration in Ottawa. How do you view that? Because Trudeau, Ford, they keep referring to it as an illegal occupation. The phrasing that they use, it drives me crazy. But how do you view it? Are you in support of those guys?
Before you answer it, I
People,
really enjoyed your answer to my question there. So thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
No problem. And push back if I'm not answering the question.
No, you're doing fine.
Yeah, I was right there on the first day, guys, like we said. And it was back in January. And I had just gotten back to fully functioning on both legs after a year of a diagnosis that wasn't so well, but now back better and stronger than ever. But it was freezing. It was still snowy out there. And I was out there on that first weekend with the team. We got the speakers and the mics set up on that first day when they were having trouble setting up, and great speakers. And a lot of good people went in there, right? And a lot of good people wanted to make the mark. We were very supportive. The New Blue Party was very supportive, and it was terrible how that ended up. I never thought, like I kind of had this sinking suspicion when we were driving there. I think we went on a Thursday for that first weekend. And I was thinking in my head, I knew that I knew that Trudeau wasn't going to back down, because I know that the left-wing base he's targeting from the NDP, that they were going to spin it a certain way, right? Racist, whatever. Oh, they put they defaced the Terry Fox statue, they said. And then I got up on Saturday and I said, well, I suffered from the same diagnosis that Terry had, and we all love Terry Fox. And of course, the media didn't cover that. But I thought after that first weekend came and went and they didn't come down hard, I thought there'd be a good resolution, right, to what was going on. I didn't think they were going to climb down. Mm-hmm. I thought some of the demands of telling Trudeau get rid of all the lockdown legislation across the province, you guys know that it's mainly provincial legislation. And so even if somehow they convinced Trudeau to do that, it would take some time for him to coordinate with the provinces. You can't force the provinces. So I wasn't sure about the ask that they were making. But I was optimistic that it was going to resolve itself and end in anything than what we saw. Because what we saw was an abomination. Like, that was just beyond the pale. And even worse was the coverage and the narrative of how they were trying to describe the people that were there, and using one or two examples, some guy in a ski mask who's probably getting paid by the government anyway to make the whole thing look bad with a flag, to make those people look like, that they were vile people or disgusting people. It was disgusting. And there were people, and, Tom Marazzo himself called out on the Andrew Lawton show a really weird thing that happened, that Randy Hillier was encouraging the leaders of the trucker convoy to negotiate with the police of the city of Ottawa and the city of Ottawa. And once word got out that they were talking about a peaceful resolution or an exit, Randy took to social media, called them all sellouts, and he sabotaged the whole thing. And Marazzo's the one that said that. He called him out on it. He called Randy out on it. So when I saw the thing going and things like that were happening, that one leader was calling out another, and they were being a rather aggressive in the tone and the rhetoric, I was getting worried that this was going the wrong way. And then when I heard that Doug Ford's buddy, Dean French, was involved, well, I don't know how anyone would bring Doug Ford's buddy into any kind of discussion like that, trusting that it was going to work out well. So it was disgusting, and it was unfortunate to see. And I hope we never see that again. Honestly, guys, I hope we never, ever see anything like that again. The government coming down on people and then shutting down businesses, trucking businesses without due process. And now we've got that stuff packaged in Bill 100.
Yeah. I was appalled. Honestly, yeah. I never thought I'd see police act like that against people who were honestly peaceful. But we did, and the media lied about it. Moving on, it makes me sick to my stomach. Everything that happened with that. Doug Ford seems to be going around right now buying votes, bribing people with everything from, now free license plates, which I think is a bait and switch, to I don't know, Brendan, what else has he offered up lately? Well, the Liberals are doing the same thing because one of the MPPs, I don't remember his name, says he wants to buy everybody free snow tires. So I guess it is the season, right?
And Andrea Horvath wants to buy everybody mental health care.
Yeah.
So the government breaks your brain over a 2 years period, and then now they want to fix it all of a sudden. Ooh.
So what's the new blue going to buy everybody?
We're not interested in buying votes. We just tell people the truth, and we try to stand up on principle. We're not perfect. No one's perfect. We'll own it if we make a mistake, but it's important that we get the candidates and we challenge these guys. We challenge the PCs with this vote buying campaign. It's very dangerous in the parliamentary system. You know, part of if you really want to get technical on the way the parliamentary system works in democracy, right? The tension between the ideologies kind of is supposed to give it a balance, right? And what we've seen in the last 4 years, when you got a PC party that's decided that they're no longer going to be right of center at all on anything, and they're going all in to try to take the Liberal vote and be a wing of the Justin Trudeau Liberal Party, it's like a runaway train of the left, because there's no one challenging them like an established party on the right. And they were able to get away with that in many instances, especially when we weren't at full speed 2 years ago. And one MPP, when there's so much darkness, one MPP like Belinda challenging them or speaking out with the support of thousands, it's like a crack of light through a bedroom window that's shuttered, right? You just need a little crack of light and exposes them, and they all go running, right? They all go running. Oh, wow. And so that's what we're going to continue to do, because the spending from the PCs is just out of control. And between the Liberals, the PCs, and the NDP, the PCs set the pace, right? They're the government. They're going to unleash their budget on us. Mercy. On April 28th, we're going to see what that disaster is like. And the Liberals and the NDP are to their left. And so the spending promises from them are going to be even worse, right? Going into a campaign. And we've got to be there to, like I said, balance the narrative and to bring that tension, that healthy tension, back in the democratic process, and to crush like the establishment narrative of that these values that we're pushing are fringe. Guys, I was born here and my parents came here because Ontario was a place that promised people from all over the world that there was a certain core set of values that we believed in. Like the idea that you can believe in an almighty God and you shouldn't have to be ashamed by it. You can express a political opinion and not be worried that someone's going to knock on your door the next day. That fiscal responsibility was a good thing, and you shouldn't spend more than what you can and pass it on to the future generations. That we decide who's in charge based on free and fair elections. These are things that that Ontarians across the province believe in. But the Liberals and the NDP and now the PCs want us all to believe those are fringe ideas. Those are, not in the mainstream. And our job with the New Blue Party is to not only balance the narrative on specific policies, but to say these values that we're talking about, these are natural values. And more people agree with them than disagree with them. And these are not ideas and values and principles that showed up in 1982 when the Liberals said, here's the charter. Because if you believe that, then the government can say, well, we gave you those rights and responsibilities. We'll just take them away whenever we want. And so we're out there with our candidates talking about the shared values that Ontarians have, and that these establishment parties have hijacked the system. It's not us that are the revolutionists. We're talking about what Ontarians agree on and what they want to see. It's the politicians and the class and the lobbyists behind them that have hijacked the process and are not giving Ontarians another option, another discourse, and are hiding their votes on critical race theory, hiding the fact that they get $100 million in taxpayer subsidies every 10 years. And we've got to return common sense to the narrative. And that's about tax relief. We haven't seen tax relief in like 2 decades in this province. It's ridiculous. People are leaving the province in droves. And because the only tax cut you ever hear about is maybe for big corporations, a slice, never for personal tax relief. It'd be great. We want to reduce that HST 3%, 3 points. We want to get rid of these wind turbines that are driving up electricity rates and get people out of energy poverty, because that's the only way to reduce electricity rates. in this province.
I'm
And so those are just some of the
glad that
ideas.
you brought that up, because somebody told that to me, and I said I would make a point of asking you, what are your thoughts on the green energy, and what's it going to take to get rid of these turbines, and is what type of cost is going to come with that, getting rid of the turbines, now that they've already been embedded in our system for so long now?
So I remember I was behind the scenes, I had pushed PCMPPs and leaderships to talk about these wind turbines. And I'd laid out in the past, historically, before anybody who knew who Jim Karahalios was, I did all the research, the legal side, the side in terms of the numbers from the grid, and then the money side. I pulled it all together. And when you look at what's out there, one thing I'll say is really funny. In both leaderships that Christine Elliott was running in, anytime someone brought up wind turbines, she'd say, oh, we can't do that. We can't take down wind turbines because it's going to send the bad signal to the business community, right? But once they were in power, boy, they figured out how to shut down businesses real fast, right? Like, no problem. So if you're an international big money developer that wants to put your money into wind turbines, that creates a banana republic in Ontario because a few people are getting money out of it, but the rest of us are paying the bill, right? That's the definition of a banana republic. When your entire population has to pay with no added benefit to them for a service they don't want, for a few people at the top to become millionaires, that's a banana republic. And Christine Elliott and the PCs would say, no, we can't do that. Can't do that. But when it came to COVID, they figured out real fast how you could shut down small and medium-sized businesses. There was no rhetoric or concern about what the business community would think, right? So I thought that I'd point out that contradiction. That was pretty funny, sad actually, not funny if you have a business, but in hindsight. So here's how you break down the law. I'm going to give credit where credit's due, and this Professor Bruce Party out of Queens. He's looked up this stuff. I don't know if he supports the New Bloom. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he thinks that the PC party should survive. That's fine. But he's done the research on this stuff, and he's written from a academic perspective the first point, which is on the law. And taking down the wind turbines is not like Dalton McGuinty canceling the gas plant in Oakville. And let me explain to you why. When the gas plant in Oakville became a political liability for McGuinty, he wanted to get rid of it without bringing a bill to the legislature and to redo the law. So he got his minister to sign a directive. We're getting really technical here, but it's like a minister takes a pen, signs a piece of paper, says contract canceled. And because he did it that way, the cancellation provisions in that contract kicked in and they had to pay the penalty. But you guys all know this principle out of the parliamentary system. No future government, no current government can bind a future government into legislation that a future government can't take away. It's a basic principle of the parliamentary system. A current government can't pass a law that says for 50 years this law can't be changed, right? Yeah. That's undemocratic, against the parliamentary system, because Parliament reigns supreme. So when it comes to provincial jurisdiction, the Ontario legislature reigns supreme. And so these 20 or 30-year contracts that we have for these wind turbines that are a rip-off, if a government passed a piece of legislation saying they would come down or canceled, it would overrule any of the contracts that are signed. There's nothing that those holders of those contracts of the wind turbines could do in court. They could go to court, they would lose, because it's entirely up to the provincial government to decide future policy or current policy. You can't lock them in from a contract that exists 20 or 30 years. And if they did that in a transparent way, they could cancel and take down the wind turbines, and they could decide what, if any, compensation goes to the farmers who've got to they've got to take the wind turbine out of the ground. The few farmers in Ontario that have them on their property and are getting money out of it, you could pay to have their farm rehabilitated. You can decide if you want to give some compensation to the developers or the big companies that put them up. But once that's done and you take them offline, the wind turbines make up like 5% of the grid,
but 25% plus of the price of electricity. And we're producing more electricity than we need and then dumping it into the US on pennies of the dollar. So the electricity price would come down hard if we got those things away. And the compensation, if the government decided what compensation would be far less than what we're paying, both in terms of the government subsidy for those electricity rates right now and what the consumer's paying, because we all know there's only one taxpayer, what the consumer pays. So it makes sense, like in terms of money, it makes sense. It makes sense in terms of kickstarting our economy and getting that GDP to grow beyond the pathetic 1% that it's been at for years with the Liberals and the PCs. It's the only way to get manufacturing back. It's the only way to bring electricity rates down without taxpayer subsidization. And there's a legal solution. And we've got to put it all together, and that's what the New Blue Party is doing, and bringing it to the narrative of politics.
So do you have a plan long-term with regard to electric vehicles? Because we've seen just in the last couple of weeks, the battery plant announced in Windsor and huge government money being pumped into that. And I've been ranting a bit about this on the show. I have nothing against electric cars as long as it makes sense. But all of this government money that's being thrown around, it just seems surreal. Then they go up to Oshawa, 260 million from the province and an equal amount from the feds to go into Oshawa, to keep that plant rolling, which was a plant they were prepared to let shut down a couple of years ago. Nothing seems to make any bloody sense to me. And we're seeing all kinds of international competition. I do some automotive journalism. There's a company from Vietnam introducing an electric vehicle. Countries all over the world are producing these cars. If this doesn't work and we don't get enough payback, all this taxpayer money that they're flooding the car companies with, it'll be for nothing. I'm really concerned about it. It just seems like it's not well thought out and they're all rushing. What is your, and I know that it's difficult from the provincial perspective because all of this stuff kind of flows down, right, from the federal government and their agenda across the provinces. But Ontario is the automotive province. What are your views on all of this money and this march toward electrification?
I love electric vehicles, the ones that I buy for my son, who's 5. Those electric vehicles, those little toys you plug in.
Is that called the Power Wheels and stuff?
I guess. That? Yeah, I don't know. He charges it or he plugs it in and let her rip. Right, that's a great electric vehicle. And soon he'll want to jump on one with a little battery you can drive around the house. I like my cars the old-fashioned way with gas, and actually a stick shift is what I prefer. And I like to hear the roar or the rev of the engine. So that's just me. I'm a little old school, guys. I'm sorry. That's just me. As for this government subsidization of this industry, this stuff never works, right? So when we had 5 good minutes of Doug Ford in the first month when he was premier, I think he had promised that he was going to get rid of the electric vehicle subsidy that was going to rich people to buy electric vehicles.
Yes.
And now he's doing it through the back way. So not direct to the buyer. He's, of course, rewarding the lobbyists. And if you hire a good lobbyist and you get in front of the PCs, you can get the subsidy right to the big manufacturer. And these deals never work, as we've seen, because when the money runs out for the 2 or 3 year commitment for those jobs, it's not an actual market. It's not an actual industry that can survive on its own 2 feet. And they've got to come back to government. And then government has to say, what am I going to do? Let those people lose their jobs or go back and cut another check? And it becomes an industry. It creates an industry that continually relies on government to survive. And this is, Rick, you gave me another example of why the PCs are just right off the cliff and beyond redemption, because they are actively going out to create an electric market for cars, electric vehicle market, that they know cannot survive without government subsidization. And when the money runs out, the people that have those jobs won't have a job because that industry cannot stand on its own 2 feet. The way to get jobs for those people and others in the future, sustainable jobs, is like we said, bring down those electricity rates substantively, not through taxpayer subsidization, get manufacturing going again in this province. I think we're down to like 750,000 manufacturing jobs in Ontario, and a few years ago we were over 1 million, just 5 years ago. So under the PCs, it's gotten worse, right? Not better. And the way to build the economy in Ontario and get the economic engine of Canada booming again is not with subsidies and creating industries out of government money. That's a recipe to fail. Like, that's just designed to fail right out of the bat. But the Ford government, they're trying desperately to get that Liberal vote to become the new Liberal Party, and that's another example of it.
So what do you see as a long-term energy strategy? More nuclear plants? Continue with a commitment to, say, natural gas, or what are you thinking?
Everything's got to be on the table. The natural gas, I can't remember, the Liberals had that promise to get rid of natural gas, and they backed off from it right away. And there's been some papers that haven't gotten much publicity where the PCs were thinking about that too. When Rod Phillips was the environment minister, there was some whispers and some papers that were coming out that they were thinking of doing that craziness too. So, of course, you got to do the natural gas. You've got to fix up the nuclear power that we have. And there's other alternatives that are coming out that are being blocked by government. And I have people calling me and telling me about these other alternatives and giving me the stories about how the bureaucracy or the deputies in charge of the ministry aren't allowing these ideas to come forward because everything is about wind and solar now, or electric vehicles. And it's a political ideology. It's not a solution that actually works. But the options are all out there. It's just, we got to have the political will. There's plenty of people studying this stuff. I mean, even the coal that they got rid of, if you looked at what the problem with the coal scrubbers that were in place, there was a marginal benefit when those coal plants were shut down, and the wind turbines they put up weren't replacing the energy loss from coal. They got that through other places, through natural gas and other systems. So there's plenty of energy options out there, but it shouldn't be wind turbines because they're not doing anything.
Yeah, the whole wind and solar thing is just a dog chasing its tail with like.
But how do you stand up to, the federal government when they're pushing electric vehicles? Today, we're even seeing that there is they plan to introduce a truck tax, an additional $4,000 to tax pickup trucks to make them more expensive. While on the other hand, you're getting subsidies for electric vehicles. They're going to make it illegal. It's what's the year 2030? I believe is the
sure. That's the promise. We'll see if that's going to happen.
So, how do you at a provincial level, if you have this federal program and direction, if everything's heading in that direction, how do you march in the other direction?
Right. So there's two aspects of your question, both like the legal, and then there's the political reality, the landscape. And they want to tax trucks, and it wasn't too long ago they wanted to tax the unvaccinated. Wouldn't it be great if a provincial government taxed the establishment media that was getting the Trudeau corporate subsidy? Like we just said, provincially, we know there's a federal issue. We can't stop the subsidization of the media from Justin Trudeau, but we're going to do a provincial tax on that corporate establishment media. That's in the new blueprint, and we're going to see how the media is going to like that. So there's two aspects to it. First of all, a lot of the stuff you're talking about, Rick, is provincial jurisdiction, and the only way the federal government can insert themselves is by transfer payments, right? And we got to have the willpower of a provincial government in Ontario, which PCs don't, to say we don't need the transfer payment. And if you're going to give us a transfer payment, we're going to send it out as tax relief. And that starts with getting Ontario's books in order, because Doug Ford is desperate for the transfer payments from Trudeau because he doesn't want to show a huge deficit. And so he's relying on the transfer payments federally to hide the fact that he's got a higher deficit than the Liberals did in 15 years. And so if you've compromised yourself or put yourself in a position of weakness, which Ford has done and the PCs have done, then you're open for Trudeau to come and cut a check, and you don't really have a leg to stand on. The other is political, guys. And I said this before, and I'm going to try not to make it too long, but cut me off if it's too long.
No, it's fine.
The Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, when they're in power, they get their seats out of Ontario. They don't get them in the West. And sometimes they get them in Quebec. They can't form a majority without majority of seats in Ontario. And when you've got a Doug Ford PC government or any PC government that now wants to not challenge the Liberals, but become their underhanded study or the wing of their party, you're now giving Trudeau carte blanche to say and do whatever he wants. Come down hard on the trucker convoy, come up with radical left-wing policies. And most Ontarians are relying on the provincial PC party and the premier, the PC premier, who has the biggest megaphone or is supposed to have the biggest megaphone in the province, to say, is this a good idea or is this a bad idea? I can guarantee you that if Doug Ford actually had a backbone and some principle, and he called out Trudeau and said, I don't like this policy and I don't like that, or challenged it, or challenged the federal government, got the other premiers together, maybe not all of them, some of them, and said, we don't like this policy, Trudeau would have to respond because he needs the seats in Ontario. But by the PCs just becoming another Liberal party, whatever idea the Trudeau government comes up with, we don't hear any opposition out of the person with the biggest megaphone, Doug Ford. And that's how they're getting away with this stuff like a tax on trucks. Because if Doug Ford was out there saying tax on trucks, no way, they'd reel that back real fast, the federal Liberals, because they know that their voters in the 905, they like their trucks. And so we've got to balance the narrative. We've got to put a complete, comprehensive party in place in Ontario that calls out the other establishment parties provincially, but also the federal Liberals, to say, hey, that's a terrible idea. And you'll see how quick the Liberals will back off, just like the NDP was backpedaling on the critical race theory bill provincially. And just like it wasn't too long ago, it seems like a long time ago, but remember when Charest and Martin were balancing the budget federally? Well, it's not a coincidence that we had a pretty conservative government for the first 2 or 3 years in Ontario at the time with Mike Harris, and we had the Reform Party breakthrough. And so that was the federal Liberals looking at the landscape and saying, we can't be as far left as we want. And we've got to bring that back. We've got to establish political parties that are challenging the left-wing narrative and force the Liberals federally to look at the landscape differently. And they're not going to get away with every crazy idea they come up with.
What other aspects of the economy would you focus on? We're right now we're seeing supply chain issues. We ran video, I think it was yesterday, Brendan, of all the empty shelves in grocery stores, just here locally. It's very it's very concerning. These are warning signs to me that the economy is in despair. So what can you do at the provincial level to address some of these issues? Because I think these are, well, a lot of it is because of what's happened with COVID, but it's also macroeconomic policy that's impacting what's going on. But the province still can do some things, I would think.
Yeah,
definitely. The reliance, because of our manufacturing sector getting gutted, the reliance on goods outside of Ontario makes us vulnerable, right? So we've got to get back to the bread and butter of what makes Ontario's economy, what made it successful. And it's a combination of reducing taxes, not just for businesses, but personal taxes. So it's a place where people who want to work or start a business come to, not a place that they flee or look to get out of, which in the last 2 years especially, increasingly people are getting out of here. We've got to create industry that's not reliant on government, like we just talked about. because government industries that rely on government and government subsidies are designed to fail from the outset. Reducing electricity rates is also a key component of that economic pillar. And finally, we need to have a provincial government that's more interested in talking to other premiers than they are placating the federal Liberal Prime Minister and Justin Trudeau. And Doug Ford spends all his time trying to do his best to satisfy Trudeau because he wants the transfer payment. And there's only one taxpayer, so whether the transfer payment is taxes federally or provincially, Ontario taxpayer is going to suffer. A leader in Ontario, a premier, should be spending more time talking about the other Canadian provinces and bringing down interprovincial trade barriers, and also the states in the north. And that's where the focus should be, and that's where the focus of successful premiers in the past has been. Working with other provincial and state leaders more than trying to placate to the federal government. All critical things that are needed, and we need more competition in the marketplace, whatever the industry is in Ontario, and homegrown businesses. So we're in control of our own destiny going forward.
Would you apply that same approach to the housing crisis, or would you take a slightly different approach there?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit unique because the market is being affected so heavily by immigration. Over 400,000 new Canadians last year, another 400,000 apparently coming in this year. The federal government throwing money at that again, just directly, like, we're just going to build houses.
Make it rain.
Right. So how do you mesh a provincial strategy with this, what I would say, sort of a left-wing socialized approach to solving a government-created
right
problem to begin with? How do you marry those two things together?
And so the federal Liberals rely on the high numbers of immigration, not just because it's a good talking point for them, for their base, about how they're pro immigration. It's irresponsible, right? They're just increasing these numbers at skyrocketing levels, and Ontario bears the brunt of it because most immigrants come here,
and most of them go to Toronto.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's no planning involved. Like, we're not able to keep up with the immigration levels just by infrastructure planning. Like, we just can't keep up. And so but the other reason why the federal Liberals are doing that is because it's their only way of growing the economy, is just to add more people. Because productivity in Ontario has been wiped out in the last few years because of the high electricity rates, high taxation, the red tape. We got to slash the red tape, not just trim it, not just cut a little red tape. The bureaucracy and the regulations are out of control. And so the productivity's taken a beating in Ontario compared to other jurisdictions. And so the only way to increase and grow the economy is by adding more people. And that's not a sustainable economic solution. That gets you to your 1.5% economic growth temporarily because you're adding people, but then you're creating an unsustainable living environment where the infrastructure is not keeping up. And like you said, one of the elements of it is the housing market, just becomes unaffordable. And so productivity is a key that I should have talked about earlier, and you're bringing it back up. Productivity, so that people are able to take home and produce within an hour highly competitive levels, and also take home pay has got to increase, not decrease, as we're going on. And so productivity is one of the things that doesn't get talked about because it's kind of really like in the weeds, and it doesn't really make for a great campaign platform. It like acts the carbon tax that captivates people, but reducing the level of taxation and getting rid of slashing the red tape, but then also on the building. We've seen the Ford PCs. They'll bend the rules on the planning process. If you're Amazon in Cambridge and you hire the right lobbyist, all of a sudden you'll get a ministerial zoning order, and you could just cut through the planning process. And look, right of center, we're for development, right? But if there's a problem with the planning process and the development process to get more houses up, to get more buildings up for business, to build roads, shouldn't we be looking at that wholesale rather than cutting corners for certain friends and certain industrial facilities, depending on which lobbyists they hire? There has to be a review of the planning process so that it's the same across Ontario. And are projects getting bogged down or not? And are we able to keep up the infrastructure with the level of immigration? And we need a strong voice that says, hey, 4,400,000 immigrants in a year, that's too many. Like, maybe it's too many. And a strong provincial leader to say, hey, like, that's unacceptable. We can't keep up the pace here in infrastructure building to keep up with it. Well, there's another example, right? Like rushing to Facebook. I'm sure Facebook, I haven't checked who's Facebook's lobbyist is. I'm sure it's someone friendly, but who knows? But, you know, the Ford PCs love the announcements, Facebook, Amazon, they'll do all that.
Yeah.
But the driving employer in Ontario is small and medium-sized businesses, not Facebook, not Amazon. Those are good for a headline. But how are we changing the circumstances for the small and medium-sized individual who's starting a business, who's running a business, to help them grow and help others come forward? And how are we changing and improving the infrastructure so that we're not getting bogged down? And then the other part of the whole thing that keeps getting missed is this drive that every job's going to be in Toronto. And there's Cambridge and out in Peterborough on the east driving into Toronto. How about instead of making everything come out of Toronto, we decentralize a bit so that business can open in other areas? Employers and employees are across Ontario. Make other strong pockets of economic activity across Ontario that are not reliant on government subsidization.
I that's exactly why I brought this up, and it went with your point there quite wonderfully, I would say. Speaking of productivity and speaking about how we're over focused on Toronto, and I understand the reason why we are. It's where the population is, but that's not Ontario. There's more to Ontario than that. I'm from Northern Ontario. There is a lot of economic depression there, and by economic depression, I mean some places up there, they look quite dismal. Good luck being a young man my age and getting a job there. How do we get productivity up there? How do we make Northern Ontario more inclusive? There is a reason why it's orange up there. They love voting NDP because they want the NDP to subsidize the individual there, because the individual, a lot of them don't feel like they have choices up there, and a lot of them don't. How do we fix that problem? Because, man, it's a big problem. There's so much we could do with Northern Ontario and make it better. It's an awesome place. But yeah, it piqued my interest with those things, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. What do you have? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know how much they love voting NDP. I mean, our candidates are telling us that they're getting kind of tired of the NDP up north, and even places like Hamilton. I got a report today that our candidate was out door knocking in a NDP stronghold, and NDP voters have had it. I think they're voting a certain way because there's no other choice, right? Like, they don't see an alternative. They don't see an option. They don't see how things can be done differently for a better future. And, you know, the Facebook example is these industries are being driven into downtown Toronto on the back of government subsidies, right?
Yeah.
And we have to get back to a government that is advocating for a market where people make a choice of where they want to work and live. Look, I was born in North York. There's no secret about it. And then my wife and I lived in Mississauga. Mm-hmm. And then we chose Cambridge as to where we wanted to have our son and build a family. And it's great. And I don't miss it. I don't miss the GTA. And my concern now is people start calling Cambridge the GTA. And alarm bells start ringing for anyone living in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, the GTA. And it's because so many people are driving into Toronto because there's not enough jobs out in the Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge area, or southwestern Ontario, or the north. And so the government programs to develop, like we just saw, jobs or facilities in Toronto distorts the economic a position of other regions in Ontario, and also distorts choices that people make of where they want to work and live. Because I don't buy that most people want to work and live in Toronto. I don't buy that. I think
Yeah.
that left to their own devices, if they could find other jobs that support their family and put food on the table and are fulfilling from a career perspective, they choose other places in Ontario, less busy, and other benefits that other areas of Ontario offer. I've been to Emo before in Kenora, and I loved it. It was a small town, but I'm also the guy that was telling you I love driving a stick shift and love gas engines. So maybe I'm not the person that we should be relying on for these.
Don't worry, I'm a kindred spirit.
Okay, well, there you go. So, there's plenty of beautiful places in Ontario, and we got to start developing an economy and putting it on the map that it's not all about Toronto all the time.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything specific that could be done for Northern Ontario to increase productivity up there, whether it be like resource development or anything like that?
The resource development has to be priority number one. And the bigger issue, I was talking to a gentleman who's was helping us with a specific Northern Ontario plan, is that the governments like to suck all the resources out of the north and then take all the spending back into Toronto, because that's where the votes are. And so something's got to be done outside the box to give Northern Ontario more power in terms of the resource benefit they get, so that it's not sucked up by government in taxation or used by government and then redistributed to downtown Toronto, where they're chasing after votes. And the solution can't always be the government subsidization of an industry, whether it's in the north or not. Because like we said, it's just when the government money runs out, the resource development won't follow.
Go away. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what they do. It'll run off.
So we're now into campaign mode, pretty much, right? I
Yeah.
think you've been in campaign mode for a while as a party. So do you have any particular strategies? Are you meeting with candidates? I know you just had a convention.
We had our first New Blue conference. I was really looking forward to doing our first New Blue conference in person. I love in-person conventions. I love getting members together to both debate and vote on policy ideas, talk about the constitution of the party, ask questions of the party executive. But obviously couldn't find a facility for 2 years with the lockdowns. And then even though the lockdowns were lifted, it was just impossible to get a facility to get set up in 2 months or even 4 weeks. And you need to give people in the north and wherever opportunity to plan ahead of time. So we decided to do it online. It was an interesting experience. It wasn't my preference because I want to see people face to face, but we put it together in 2.5 weeks because we had a lot of training to go over with our candidates. And we got over 700 people, and we had some great speakers. Theo Fleury, Sue-Ann Levy, Will Witt from PragerU joined us. Richard Sirrett, who's got a radio show on Saga 960. I hope I'm not missing any guest speaker, guys, feature speaker. But it was great. Over 700 people. We were blown away. We pulled it together in 2.5 weeks. The team worked really hard around the clock. And we went over some campaign strategies in terms of, one of the things that we learned watching the PPC come forward is the PPC, a lot of their candidates were put in place kind of right before the writ. And, maybe last time, the first time it's always hard when you go through it. And then the last time there was a minority situation. So I don't really want to criticize them because they weren't, you're not really sure when the election is going to be called. But because we know June 2nd is the vote, we were trying really, really hard to get as many candidates in place ASAP and give the candidates the tools to get going and get out there with a direct voter contact. You could always want it. You always want it earlier. Next election, if we have 4 years, we'll get on it earlier. And one of our goals is to put candidates in place early. That's why we're just down to 2 or 3 ridings, and have those candidates focus on direct voter contact and put our platform out there in whole so everyone can see it. and raise awareness and contrast. And so, guys, I'm sure you've heard it. People say nasty things about me. How can this guy campaign like that? How dare he talk about someone's voting record? That's supposed to be not allowed in Canadian politics. We don't talk about voting records. We contrast, guys, on every issue. We say, here's where we stand, here's where the other guys are. And we do that because people want to know the difference. And we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep contrasting, and we encourage our candidates to contrast with their local candidates. And direct to voter. There's no media outlet that's going to help us out, guys. There's no stunt that we're going to do. Belinda and I have been through the ringer for 5 years. We've been in the press enough times. And this is we just got to fight through it and grind through it. One of the great analogies, or one of the things I remembered recently when we were doing our campaign training, is Rob Ford, the first time he ran. The real Rob Ford, not his brother. First time he ran for city council in Etobicoke, he finished 4th. I looked it up because I had forgotten. And his dad was a cabinet minister, or an MPP in the Mike Harris government. And Rob ran in the same area. And so you'd think, like, he had the name, that he would have done better. But the first time he ran, he finished 4th. And it took him 2 or 3 election cycles after that. He won the next time as city councilor. And he grinded it out for 10 years, right? Sticking to principle, building his narrative, helping Ontarians or Torontonians in his ward, and answering every call. And he used to tell me, you got to pound the ball, just like football, 1 inch at a time. Rob used to tell me. And it took him like a decade to build the profile and get enough support to run for mayor. And even in that mayoral race, it was like a joke and everyone dismissed him. And I always remember when we get impatient, we want to be at 40% in the polls tomorrow. People are desperate for change, and they say, why aren't you everywhere? Like, I'm talking to my friends, and they don't know who the New Blue is. What are you guys doing? And we just got to remind people, like, there's no shortcut, right? We're running against 2 parties with a brand that's over 100 years old. We need to get direct to voter, door knocking in every riding, in every community, volunteers stepping forward. We got a volunteer link on the website, so anyone watching wants to help out, fill it out. Let us know you can help us out. We got people in Cambridge have been itching and ready to go for Belinda. I'll be running in Kitchener-Conestoga, but we got to pound the ball, because guys like Doug Ford, who are not like Rob, they just want the quick pop in the media. Oh, let's just do an electric vehicle announcement. The media will give us coverage. But the real conservative voter, the real Ontarian who wants to respect the taxpayer, stand up for family, stand up for parental rights, defend places of worship, they're not listening to that stuff in the media and the stunts and stuff like that. They just want people to be real, come forth, present their solutions, and that's what we're going to do, guys. And I don't know how fast it's going to break through, but I know we're going to stick to it beyond June 2nd because it's important. And look, I hope on June 2nd, Belinda gets reelected. I hope I get elected, and I hope we get a whole bunch of New Blue MPPs, because we'll certainly do a lot more with more than one New Blue MPP. We've got one now, and we're doing quite a bit, and hopefully we get more. But even if it doesn't work the way we want it on June 2nd, we're going to keep going and keep building. And I know that the only way the establishment's been able to stop us before is to either rig elections or kick us out. And they're not kicking us out of this one anymore. So,
well, I think you've proven already that having even a single voice, a single elected voice in the legislature can make a big difference.
Well, thanks.
And so it's absolutely worthwhile to have the New Blue in the race. And I think it's very productive. Can I just backtrack though? You did touch on places of worship, and I'm curious to know what your views are with protecting religious freedom in the wake of all of these pandemic measures.
Yes, great question. And I'm going to get a little bit more personal on this one. Do you remember, I don't know if you guys remember back in 2020 when the lockdown first started in March.
Yeah.
Some church leaders were starting to come forward and say they were concerned, right? And it was very early on. And when Belinda got kicked out, there were a group of church leaders in Grimsby. No one was talking to them. No politician. And it's not in her riding. It's in Grimsby. There's no New Blue Party at the time. And she went out of her way. She drove right down to Grimsby to meet with these religious leaders, Christians, and other faiths. And they were professionals, and they were really concerned. And they said to Belinda, "We don't have anyone listening. We need someone to speak up and defend not only places of worship, but like our people in our congregations are afraid, like they're getting targeted for their views." And she stood up for them. She continually asked questions in the legislature, just up the street from us. In the riding of Kitchener-Conestoga was the Trinity Church. They had their doors locked. They had the book thrown at them. It was ridiculous. Belinda kept exposing it with two or three times in the question period. And miraculously, it just went away. Government just backed off because Belinda kept putting the pressure on, and we were raising awareness of what was going on. And the unfortunate thing is, some of the other individuals involved in those circles, they encouraged us to start the New Blue, and now they don't have very nice things to say about us, which is unfortunate. Kind of feel like we were used by a couple of the faith leaders in the Christian community, specifically Mike Thiessen. He started that End the Lockdown caucus. So after Belinda was the only politician who'd respond to Mike and spoke out in the legislature, he went off and started the End the Lockdown caucus. I wasn't invited. So good pastor he is. He suggested that me and my wife, she joins the End the Lockdown caucus, but ditches her husband and puts her husband in the back burner and says, "Honey, you go deal with your health matter." And we're not going to do that. You can't really trust a politician to defend you if they're not even going to defend their spouse, right? And despite the fact that we've sat down with Mike Thiessen, who led the End the Lockdown caucus a few times, and gave him a sneak peek, the New Blue. The first meeting I had after I got back on my feet from my health scare, we brought in Pastor Thiessen with his gang, and we showed them like the party constitution before it was public. Told them over 100 riding associations we had in place, candidate application, and they said, "We're right behind you. We're right with the New Blue." And for some reason that I can't figure out, he went off and committed to the Whisper campaign, trashing me, tried to start a party with Randy Hillier, and then I guess they're fully behind the Derek Sloan party now. So as fickle as the politicians they criticize, that's unfortunately Mike Thiessen. But look, we're going to keep defending places of worship and the principle, regardless of whether a certain pastor, is fine with us while we're doing what he wants us to do and then ditches us when it's politically opportune for them. Because it's not about the pastoral leadership or the leadership of the Catholic Church, because in many respects, you can't trust those guys. It's about the people that go to the church. Yeah. And so we don't take our marching orders at the New Blue from the quote unquote people that want to be leaders at the churches or at the places of worship. We do what we do based on principle and based on the people that worship. And those are the people that we're committed to and the principles we're committed to. And so even if some of the pastors who once said they're with New Blue aren't with us anymore and are endorsing other candidates because they want to stick up and be a part of the PC establishment, we're fine with that. We'll just stick to our principles. So
when we saw all of this unfold, we saw incredible division in communities, especially in places like Elmer. Mm-hmm. And we saw charges laid against these churches that insisted on gathering in their place of worship because it was their view that it was God's calling for them to worship in that way. What's your view? What would you have done differently? Would you have I guess you wouldn't have locked them down.
No, you let them worship. There's no worshiping. There's no there's no Christianity over Zoom, right? Like, I'm an Orthodox Christian. A lot of times Christians get into fights with other denominations because they're trying to prove which one is right. And then we don't see like the real enemy coming, who just shows up and says, "Oh, you can't have church anymore. Go put it on Zoom." And judges were saying, "Oh, it's the same thing." It's not the same thing. Church is church. It's not church over Zoom. And so there's something called religious freedom, and maybe the government could have had them put a warning sign or something. But at the end of the day, if a person wants to go and worship, it's their right to go and worship. And it was totally ridiculous shutting down those churches. They already have capacity limits in place and that kind of thing. But telling them they couldn't open up. And some of the churches, they took their services outdoors. And some of them haven't recovered, though, right? I hear about it all the time from the different denominations. People stop going back. And how they're going to recover is going to be very, very difficult. But there's no church on Zoom. Like, that's not a thing in the Christian faith, or I'm pretty sure in other faiths. And that was just terrible. And Pastor Rayom, Trinity Bible, courageous. He took a beating from the Toronto Star. I think the Waterloo Record's a Toronto Star version over here, because he defended his congregation. So good for him. And they need political leaders to back them up when they're taken to task by the powers that be, because they do it out of a place of faith. But boy, I know what it's like. It can get really like lonely, right? When all of the media voices and all the politicians and all the lawyers and the judges are scolding you, and then piling on and saying that you're harming people, right?
Killing grandma.
Yeah. When it's sick. Like they're doing the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Doing the opposite. And when people have family members getting sick, they turn to places of worship.
Well, it's clear the province has a lot of healing to do, and hopefully someone like you can help facilitate that.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, the mass formation psychosis isn't over yet.
Well, I don't like to use those terms too often, Brendan. I'll let you do that. But
it was my term. I use that term.
Right.
And what I mean by that is there's a lot of fear, and we've seen what the fear does. And I mean, the only way I know how to combat it anymore is to keep talking about it, right? Like we can't be afraid.
But as I say, we need to bring people together and find a way for the province to heal, because there's still a huge divide. People are very divided even now. Not as much, I think, as some people have shifted their views somewhat. But boy, there's still a lot of scars and still open wounds. How would you as premier address that?
And the debate's very polarized, right? And that's, I talk to friends, and look, I have friends that I grew up with that are not on side with our politics.
Yeah.
But what the worst part is the way that people, I've seen friends and families like go at each other, right? And hear the stories of like the vicious rhetoric that they spew at each other from both sides. And when you have a crisis like that, government's job is to lower the temperature. And when the Toronto Star is putting on their front cover nasty comments about what should happen to the unvaccinated, the premier should be taking them to task, not giving them an online gambling license to help fund that crap. The premier has a responsibility to lower the temperature and to give people the confidence that everything's going to be okay. And I think we also have an obligation to not just dismiss it outright. We can say, look, and this is not a politically opportune position for me, right?
No.
It's easier to drum it up and say that the whole thing was overblown and dismiss it. But when I get someone in East York calling me and her mom is sick and they've told her it's COVID and she goes in a coma and dies, her mom, I don't feel responsible going out there and saying, COVID, it's just like the flu. Maybe you don't like that, don't vote for me, vote for someone else. But can you imagine if monoclonal antibodies were widely available across Ontario from the get-go? How different the discussion would have been? Like the fear would have been reduced, where people would know that if they got COVID anyway, they could take the monoclonal antibody treatment and severe side effects would be reduced 70, 80%, and other early treatments, instead of just saying, get vaccinated. And if you're around someone that's not vaccinated, blah, 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 they fill in the rest. And so that's government's responsibility, is to say, to look at the situation, say, there's no way we're going to get everyone to do what we want them to do. So let's figure out other options to make sure we don't create what we saw in the last 2 years.
And would you also agree that we need to appropriately look at the classes of people that are being hurt by it? For example, I mean, my viewers know that I had I was affected by the virus that shall not be named for a 2-week period, and Rick, he's just getting out of it, and
I'm still pretty much infected.
Yep.
Wow.
But I mean, realistically here, we all know who it is really affecting, and what is it that we could possibly do to help the more elderly, the people with the comorbidities, and that sort of thing, that wouldn't be overreaching for those individuals, but at the same time would allow them to be safe.
Right. Getting them the proper care is critical, and getting to the bottom of whatever's going on in those long-term care homes, just atrocious.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, look, another thing that we're overlooking is the idea that so many people couldn't be with their parents at the end because of these ridiculous mandates.
That's what makes it so hard, because I mean, at where is the line? And once you start being like, well, you can't see your dad ever again, and he's probably going to pass away, and all this depression isn't helping his debilitating illness. Where's the line on it? And it, even for me to look at it, and yes, I'm very firm in what I believe, but I could certainly appreciate what you'd said there about this is absolutely something that's real and people are sick with it. Yes, I concur. But where's the line on it, and how do we help those specific people?
Yeah, the clamping down on social distancing didn't do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember, it wasn't too long ago. Remember that nonsense on COVID zero?
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be zero, guys. Like zero. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They were the zeros that were promising that.
Yeah, look at Shanghai.
That was the freaky, that video. But the clamping down on the social distancing rules didn't do anything. And people need their loved ones and their faith at the end to support them, and you can't deprive people of that. And we need to, early treatment is critical, and it can't just be all about a vaccine, because not everyone's going to go for it, and then the vaccine doesn't work the way they thought. And there's got to be a multitude of options and voices that are being heard. And public health is, they're concerned about their mandate, but it's not just about public health, the society, right? It's medical doctors, and there are other considerations that a responsible government has to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Rehiring the nurses is also critical, and the backlog that's come up with the healthcare system has to be aggressively tackled. And the people who lost their jobs, we got a couple candidates who are nurses, and rehiring those nurses and other professionals who were forced out of their jobs a very important step to getting things back to normal and lowering the temperature.
I would also ask,
Yeah.
this is me personally as an Ontarian. I do have a lot of experience in a healthcare background. Ontario has the potential for an amazing at-home nursing program,
Right.
and it has a lot of service providers that are doing a pretty good job for the most part. I mean, I don't know all the stats on it, so I'm not going to vouch for all that, but there definitely some important work there. And working there, I'm not able to say a whole lot, but what I am able to say is there's a limited support from the government, and at the same time, there is a whole thing where the cost of services doesn't get to go up, and so it's not so much a competitive business based off of this heavily red tape thing. And I do expect there to be red tape in healthcare, but is that something that we could look at? Because I mean, it could certainly alleviate a lot of end of life things. It could certainly make life better for a lot of people, or at least in my opinion. I was wondering what your thoughts on that might be.
Are you talking about the choice in services? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So we have something in Ontario called at home nursing. Usually. So depending on whether you're end of life or you have a wound that needs to be looked after, so on and so forth, there's service providers. Some of them are community living, Christian Horizons. I go on with various different things. They send a nurse to your home, and then they deliver care at home. And it's all funded through, well, it used to be the
CCUC.
Local Integrated Health Network,
Right.
the LIN. So, is there any improvements that you foresee that could be done to that system?
Well, there's too much bureaucracy in that system, and it's really hard to make it an efficient system. The people in the system are great, right? I've dealt with the people in the system before. Mm-hmm. I've had others deal. My dad, when he passed away, dealt with home care, and the people all have their hearts in the right place, and they're all doing it for the right reasons. The job very different than kind of the phone call we got at our house when public health called. The weirdest thing, right? I don't know if you got it, but that call from public health at a phone number without a name, and they, hi, is this Jim Karahalios? Yeah. You've been diagnosed with, and then they start rhyming all these questions off, a very cold, calculated way, like you're a number. Well, the people in the home care system aren't treating you like a number. They're doing their best. But oftentimes you see the whole system is bogged down with bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy eats up a bunch of the cost. And fundamentally, the mandating people to go through one option and is not a modern approach to healthcare. And we have to allow for more options to open up. And a lot of the providers that you're talking about in each geography or each region in Ontario, the government decides it's one provider and that's it. Mm-hmm. And if you figure out how to navigate through the bidding process and you get on the list, great. But if not, you're not on that list. And the regulatory burden on a lot of the in that home care field is so high that it's really hard for other entrants to come in. And the subsidization of the existing vendors takes others out of the market unless they're on the list getting the subsidy for the product they're producing, right? So the playing field has to be leveled and the power has to be put in the person that needs the care to make the decision.
I can respect that, yeah. And I mean, we've talked about that a little bit in on the show here before too, and that's a pretty good point. Power to the people.
Well, healthcare is an important topic, and it's increasingly eating away at our budget in Ontario. And the economy's got to start growing at a faster rate than it is because the healthcare spends a lot greater than our economic growth.
And it's going up.
Yeah.
Not going down.
I foresee some really bad future Liberal or PC governments making some really bad choices because the economic growth is so slow. but the healthcare spend is so much higher on a percentage, and eventually the money will run out and the services won't be there. And we're already seeing it, right? Like the backlog on treatments, and they're just clamping down on the services because they can't afford it, and the economy puttering away at 1%. But guys, we got the New Blue Party of Ontario and the new blueprint and the values and principles behind it. And it's just a start, even though it's been a long 5 years. It's just the start. And we're a year and a half into building the party. And we're saying the things and putting the things on the table that Ontarians aren't hearing from the other establishment parties. And the more we get the word out, and thankful to you guys to welcome me and have your viewers listen to me and about the New Blue Party, the more people hear, we increasingly hear people support us. And we're getting not only people that vote PC, but we're getting people to vote for us that don't vote, haven't voted in a long time, vote NDP, vote Liberal, vote Green. And it's about talking about the things the other parties don't want to talk about and talking about values and principles. And we're just going to keep pushing. And we don't have all the answers now. No one does. But we'll keep being responsive to what we're hearing from Ontarians and putting together comprehensive plans, because things will get better if we keep pushing. They don't have to get worse. It's not inevitable.
Well, we've been on for 2.5 hours, and this is a long form program, and we greatly appreciate you showing your endurance. And it's, as I say, a privilege to have you on tonight with us, Jim. I think you've kind of wrapped up, but are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the viewers before we wrap up?
No, I really appreciated this, and the long form format is way better. Like, I always feel pressure, like, to pack everything. How am I going to tell the whole new blueprint and answer this in 20 minutes? And this was much better to get into the long form. So good on you guys for doing this. And thank you, Rick, for reaching out. And Brendan, it was good to meet you.
You as well, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure. And it was very interesting to look at your past. And I would say that you're the political prophet of Canada, because you're just like,
there's no prophets. I'm not a prophet.
All these red Tories, and well, what do you know? There's a bunch of red Tories there.
Yeah, too much experience, guys. That's the problem. Too much hair that fell out of my head doing this politics. And well, we just feel we have an obligation that if you have the knowledge from experience and you know what's plaguing the system, to let people know, give them another option. We have an obligation to the people that have supported us and want us to keep going forward. And we're going to defend that. And we're going to defend the values. And, we're kind of done with the angling and the measuring and, how am I going to get that vote? We just put it out there. And if you want to support us, there it is. But if after what we've gone through is not good enough and you're not convinced, 3 lawsuits, getting kicked out, getting banished from parties. If you're not convinced, I'm not sure what else we can do at this point to earn your support. Because a lot of politicians will come forward come election time and say, I'll do this for you and I'll do that for you. And it's hard to trust, right? The commitments. And what I ask from people when they say, how do we know you're going to, you're backing up or you believe in, or you're going to do what you say? I say, look at our history. We've never backed down. They've tried to get rid of us several times. They've hoped we'd go away. And we don't back down. We don't compromise on some fundamental things. And we love working with other people. And we've got almost 124 candidates in place and hundreds of riding leaders and thousands of members and donors. And so as much as the other guys like to say it's just Jim and Belinda, it's not. The freedom movement and the anti-establishment pro-defense of the taxpayer vote going into Ontario, it's united under the New Blue Party of Ontario with thousands of people behind us, members and donors, and thousands more that are supporting us. And the only holdouts, guys, are the men and women, the small group that like to make apologies for the PCs and say they didn't understand what the bill said and give them another chance. Those are the only holdouts. But we're united, And right now, Belinda and me have been the face of it, but we've got 122 others soon that are also going to join us. And they're going to be new leaders because the movement's not us, and the movement's not 4, 5, 6, 7 people. That's not the movement. The movement is people across Ontario, and we're the ones in the position to help them and move it forward on their shoulders. That's the movement. So don't get distracted by the movement is, 4 or 5 political leaders who insert themselves at a certain time and grab the mic at a convoy and speak, or grab the mic on stage because the organizers let them get on stage. That's not the movement. The movement's not Jim Karahalios, and the movement's not the New Blue Party. The movement is the millions of people across Ontario who want another option. And the New Blue Party of Ontario is the banner under which that movement is coalescing provincially. And we're grateful that for the support, and they've pushed us forward to make sure we don't quit. And I'm grateful that you guys have given me the opportunity to talk more about it in person, not through the whisper campaigns.
Well,
It's been,
hey,
our privilege.
Thanks.
we wish you Godspeed, sir, and best of luck. And thank you so much for your time. And yeah, this was absolutely awesome to have this conversation with you today. We wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
And you're welcome back anytime, and hope that we can have you back maybe 1 or 2 more times before the people go to the polls.
Sure, that'd be great. And I'm looking forward to meeting you guys. And we got Rhonda and Chatham-Kent Leamington running for us. And
Yep.
when I come down to see Rhonda, and she's a great candidate for us, maybe we can meet. And absolutely, we'll try to schedule it again before and after.
Sounds
That'd be
great.
awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
There she is. We're good friends with Rhonda. She is awesome.
We're fortunate to have her as a candidate. She is
Yeah.
great.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
And there you have it, folks. Jim Karahalios, leader of the Ontario New Blue Party. And I guess that gives you a pretty good sense after 2.5+ hours of what the new blueprint is about, what the party platform is, what Jim Karahalios is all about, and where we're going heading into the next provincial election. Any thoughts, Brendan?
Well, first off, this is not something you're going to get anywhere else in Ontario. Like, you're not going to see CBC sit down with a politician for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And these are the things that are changing. People are interested in listening to these sorts of things, and they want to know more about people. And Jim was absolutely right. You're not going to get out of a 30-second clip, you're not going to get the full picture of what is happening. I stated on the program before, I'm currently not providing an endorsement for any candidates, and that I really want everybody to do their own research and come to your own conclusions. Find candidates that you align with and that you have respect for. And don't just go for this 30-second clips. Go find out. An educated voting decision is a good voting decision at the end of the day. But I really want everybody to come to those conclusions themselves. And I feel that it's very important. It's up to you if you want to have an opinion where you don't believe there's a political solution for anything. But that's not my opinion. I want you to look stuff up, and I want you to go to those conclusions and make a decision and just go vote. It's very important. It's important for all of us. And Ontario voter turnout is not very good. And Jim said it at the beginning of the program. These establishment parties, they love it when you just don't vote. It's the best thing in the world for them. So please go vote.
So I've always followed him to some degree.
Yeah.
Because he surfaces every once in a while, he makes headlines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that has always made an impression on me is that he's always been consistent.
Yes.
And that's very rare these days in in an environment where politicians keep flip-flopping, you don't know whether they're coming or going or what they stand for or whether you can trust them. For me, consistency is important.
Yeah,
And we've had that with Jim Karahalios and with Belinda.
absolutely. And they're hands down, they're a power couple together. Just the things that they have achieved together, and the consistency is hugely important. Hugely important, because I mean, look what happened to Aaron O'Toole, right? He wasn't consistent, and look what he got.
Well, that's what happens when you try to just follow the polls, right?
Mhm.
When you're implementing policy or just developing a platform based on polling. And that's what we've been seeing throughout the pandemic as well. We know that's been going on.
Yes.
They say they're following the science, but they really haven't been. They've been following polls. Depends, and that's self-perpetuating. It creates this psychological feedback loop where the media scares the crap out of people. People then respond to polling questions in a particular way because they're scared, and then politicians respond to that with policies that respond to their fear, which then takes it back to the media talking about how the government's implementing policies that are a response to people's fear, which creates another round of fear. But that's a more complicated issue. The point is,
Well, you seem
been
to
consistent.
have put it down pat there. So I mean, I wouldn't put that past our viewers at all.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
But he has been consistent.
Yes,
So
with integrity. I mean, he's not wavering on it. Look, folks, carbon tax is going to save the country. It does need to go. I'm solid on that. I won't waver on that.
I will say I'm disappointed, Brendan, that we're seeing such division between these politicians.
Yes.
Instead of working together, we see, more than one party. We see, politics is a blood sport. And
it is a blood sport. And I think I could see that Jim appreciates that sentiment very well. His words during the interview were, well, I mean, if he's going to go after me, I'm going to swing back. And I think we have I agree to disagree on that, but I still feel the real threat is the NDP Liberals, and ultimately with Ontario, when those two get in the same bed together, things get crappy for everybody. I don't know what a better word to use for it than that.
Yeah. Well, things are pretty crappy right now. So hopefully brighter days are ahead. I sure hope.
I sure hope so too.
But, that being said, it's 8:43. I think we've kind of covered all the ground tonight, and we've shown that we are able to. I'm sorry, my brain is still full of fog, and I'm still sick. So I'm trying to keep my thoughts straight. I'm having a little trouble stringing my thoughts together. The point is, we were able to dedicate, as Brendan said, over 2.5 hours to this interview tonight to give you an in-depth look at the New Blue Party and an in-depth look into the man, Jim Karahalios, to help you make an educated decision as you move into this provincial election and you start to formulate a decision on who you're going to vote for. This is just part of what we do here. And if you can support us, you can go to freedomreporters.com and make a donation. You can click on the hot links in the YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble descriptions and make a donation by going straight to the donation page. And you can also do what Brendan's going to tell you what to do. To
You
support.
could smash the thumbs up button. You could hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You could share this interview with some friends, maybe even your family. Spread the word out there.
You could do that.
That would be really appreciated. These things are just as helpful as monetary donations. And hey, at the end of the day, I really appreciate everybody who came out and had this discussion with us, because it wasn't just us. You were all here with us for the ride. And
yeah,
as far as that goes,
we weren't able to share comments this evening too much, but we'll get back to that in the next episode. You know what I'd like to do tomorrow night, Brendan, and maybe we can ask the viewers if they would ask our Maverick family if they'd like to cover this tomorrow. And maybe you've got something else in mind. I did discuss this briefly with you, but tomorrow I'd like to do a special broadcast if everybody's up for it. I want to do and we could do it another night if there's something else that we need to cover tomorrow, if something comes up even. I want to do a can Trump win the next election, and do a call-in show dedicated to that. Let's see what people have to say about that. I think that there are a lot of issues and details surrounding that question that I think would affect both the United States, Canada, and the world. What do you guys think? What do we say here? Would like to see a younger man, honestly. I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I'm too old for her. That's okay.
Well, we're getting pretty positive response. Yes. Oh, DeSantis. So it looks like we have a hotbed here for possible debate. We'll have to see.
What else? We have better ask if Trump won the last election when he got rigged. Yeah. Okay.
We're not allowed to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, we just have to do it the way we always do it. That's all right. Creative talk.
Good luck.
So what do you think, folks? Is that take Good Friday off? Saturday, maybe. Jack Frost says, What are you thinking, Brendan?
Well, we could take tomorrow off. It's up to you.
Well, help us out here, folks. You want us back tomorrow, or do we take tomorrow off, or we do the can Trump win? Rhonda says yes. Yes, take it off, or yes, do the subject. Do Trump, can Trump win? Trump is for the working man. Yeah, but do you want to cover the topic tomorrow night? It's Good Friday. Take a day. It might prevent me from dying.
Oh,
no, work, damn it.
Yeah,
Good Friday.
Well, I mean, I think I might have, now that it's being mentioned, I think I might have some obligations tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Cover it on Saturday. Okay, that's what we will do. We'll take tomorrow off, which is a very rare thing. I don't think we've had any days off. There hasn't been a day. Oh, there was one day.
Sunday.
There was one day we couldn't do the broadcast.
My power was down.
Oh, that's 2 days then we weren't able to do broadcast. There was one day when you weren't available and I couldn't do it. So there was, because of stuff in the studio. So we've only missed 2 days in, I don't know how many months. So tomorrow we will take off, and we'll be back Saturday with a special Can Trump Win the Next Election call-in show. So that will help make up for us not being able to share too many of the comments tonight. And I think that'll be a fun show. A lot of different aspects to that we can talk about, like because I don't think he's a shoo-in the way that some people think that he would be if he got nominated again. If he gets it's just not, the support isn't as ironclad as it was before. There's some chinks in his armor, I think.
And some folks are talking about an emerging threat for Donald Trump, which is Ron DeSantis, which
Yeah.
he's awesome.
Yeah. Or could you imagine a Trump DeSantis ticket?
Ooh.
That'd be pretty stellar. That'd be a juggernaut.
That'd be the greatest debate ever if they debated each other.
Oh, well, yeah.
Even that.
But
But
I think
together,
they like each other. I think they like each other.
oh,
So,
yes. Yeah.
You know, I don't know where that would go. I'm just saying if it was like Trump for president and DeSantis for VP on the ticket together, that could be
Yep.
powerful. That could be very powerful.
Yeah, that would be a huge powerhouse.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And Joe Biden would be running for the basement.
Yeah. If he's even around in the next election. We'll see what happens. But
Yep.
But yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone, tonight. It was a great interview with Jim, and I hope everybody found it helpful and productive. I know I did. I'm grateful for him joining us tonight, and by Saturday, hopefully my head is back. The last 2 nights, trying to talk about economics yesterday with my head all messed up the way it is. It was a little tough sometimes to string my thoughts together. It's a little tough tonight too.
Well, brother, like I said,
we'll manage.
that was the last symptom to go for me. So I hope you rest up tomorrow. Get better, man. That's all we could do. So,
well, hopefully I make more sense on Saturday. I'm Rick Walker.
And I'm your co-host, Brendan Kennedy.
That way. It's always opposite. And you're watching the Maverick News Channel. We will be back Saturday then, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Are you going to join us on Saturday, Brendan, or do you have your kids? It's Easter weekend.
I should be. We'll figure something out. We'll talk.
All right. Okay, cool. So we'll be back. I'll be back anyway, Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because I'm self-quarantining, even though the government isn't making me. I just think it's the right thing to do. So until I get fully better, I'll be sitting right here anyway. So I got nothing better to do than come on here and talk to you guys about Donald Trump Saturday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Catch you all on the flip side.